A bright flash appeared in the sky, its beam flying down and crushing the building beneath it. The city's loudspeaker warned of the opening of the last gate and the arrival of the Demon King. The voice said that their hero Baek Jin would fight him and urged all citizens to evacuate the epicenter of the battle. On the rubble of the building, a cloaked figure emerged from the beam. The cloak covered the skeleton's bare bones, which glowed with a blue glow, and the swordsman was already standing in front of him. The alien asked the stranger how he dared to stand against him alone, and whether he was not afraid of losing his life. Baek stood calmly and said that he had nothing to fear. Gripping his sword tighter and rushing into the attack, he said that he had not felt this fear for a long time. The skeleton repelled the attack with a magic shield, and the boy shouted that all he needed to do was kill it and close the last gate. He attacked again and again, but the shield absorbed every blow. The skeleton was laughing at his words, and with a single snap of his finger, he threw the hero into the wall, leaving a long crater on the ground. But the next moment, the swordsman was already delivering another blow, which managed to penetrate the shield and make a crack in the skeleton's skull. The boy said that the victory of the hero over the villain would be too simple a denouement. The enemy recognized his power and recognized him as a hero of all mankind. The skeleton said that real glory awaited him, but the boy said in an indifferent voice that he did not care. Baek was immersed in memories. Another battle was over and many of them had died. A girl was dying in his arms, hoping that he would save the world because he was the chosen one. The chosen one sobbed over her body. No praise or gratitude for saving her in the future mattered to him. The duty entrusted to him, and hundreds of people's words about the need for him only pressured him even more. He held his sword to the enemy's skull, and said that although he was a warrior and a hero, he was exhausted. Baek suggested that they kill each other, and then he would finally be able to escape this fate. One way or another, he failed to protect the person he cared about most. He struck the bony man and his body began to dissipate in the wind. The magic of his bones was getting brighter and was about to explode. The boy had done his duty, and now he could die in peace. He closed his eyes and waited for the long-awaited end. Baek rejoiced that he no longer had to hold the sword in his hands, and darkness fell in his mind. But the darkness began to dissipate at the sound of someone's voice. Opening his eyes, he saw a gray-haired bearded man standing over him, happy that their little prince had woken up, and touching his cheek with his finger. The boy did not understand what was happening. He thought that a giant had attacked him. He tried to remember how everything ended with that last gate, but decided to kill the giant first. A small hand squeezed the giant's finger, and the man was glad that little Riley had such a strong grip. A blonde woman standing next to him said it was because he had been woken up. The boy saw the fragile hands in front of him, and did not believe that they were his. Maybe they were just his childhood memories, but for some reason, he was called Riley. The woman was also happy to see the boy's talents, and said that he was the son of the great swordsman Count Iplet. The dark-haired kid thought he was in some other world, and tried to understand the woman's words about a certain count. The next moment, a man in a coat and red tie came through the door. He addressed the boy and asked if he was ready to receive the blessing of the sword. The man was a master swordsman, and the child was his youngest son. Their family, the Iplets, was a family of great swordsmen. This blessing was an important and long-awaited ritual for each of their children. The adults had already seen the boy pick up a sword for the first time, and were happy to see him join the ranks of the masters. He would become the pride of his father, and some even asked if the sword was ready and polished for the kid. Listening to all this, the kid remembered how in his previous life he had promised himself never to pick up a weapon again, and now he was here, reborn in a family of sword masters. He shouted why he was being tortured, but all he could hear was a child's cry. The next moment, he saw 4 swords hovering over him and screamed, not realizing what they were doing. Hanging above the child was a rattle with real swords, the points of which were pointed directly at the child. A man from the staff enthusiastically declared that the kid seemed to like swords, and already wanted to take one in his hands. Riley screamed at these fools that he didn't like any of it and hated swords. He swore never to pick one up and would have been happy to die, but for some reason he was reborn with the memory of his past life. But all the adults saw and heard was their little lord crying. 19 years later, the county of Ippolito was about to elect a new heir. People in the tavern raised their glasses to the count's sons, 2 of whom were always with him. At first glance, their skill was noticeable. The elder lion followed the path of strength and was a famous monster fighter. The middle son, Lloyd, was so fast and agile that he could cut a drop of water in half in midair. One of the men over a drink asked about the third son, but his partner didn't even remember him, because he had grown up to be a nobody. Next to them, a gray-haired bearded man was enjoying his beer. The men continued to discuss the lazy son, who allegedly had no ability with a sword, although he reached for it at the moment of blessing. One of them said that it was probably just a fable, and that this nobody would never become anything in his lifetime. The gray-haired man was just finishing his beer and slammed his mug on the table. He asked his friends how they dared to talk about the count's son like that, but they said that everyone knew about his mediocrity and idleness. The bearded man denied their words and tried to assure them that he was actually training hard and had more potential than his brothers. At that moment, the adult Riley was lying under a tree and enjoying its shade. He looked up at the sky and saw a hamburger in the cloud. He liked this world, but there was no time for that here either. The bearded man continued to prove to the 2 boys that the one who was so badly remembered was actually trying his best and was a very honest person. At that moment, Riley was still thinking about the Coke. He had been feeling nostalgic lately and was remembering his past life. The boy believed that with a certain age he would forget everything. His past version at the same age could not even imagine his future. He was then accidentally able to lift the sacred sword, which was not possible for others. From that moment on, he had to save humanity from the demon king, and from that moment on, he could no longer be himself. Then he became a warrior, and it was his inevitable destiny, which is why he was not going to touch a weapon under any circumstances in this life. A bearded man had just found him and asked if he had been training with a sword, reminding him that the heir would soon be chosen and other families would be invited to the ceremony. But the boy said he had no reason to try. He was already considered an extra lazy son. The gray-haired man asked if the boy knew about the rumors. Why didn't he want to prove them wrong? But the boy just replied that they were right. The man continued to try to convince him and was concerned about his reputation, but he told him not to pay attention to people's chatter. Riley didn't care, because he had learned the hard way, and let Yang, the gray-haired bearded man's name, live as long as he did, and then he would understand. Yin grabbed hold of his strong head and said that the young gentleman was only 19 years old. They returned to the estate at lunchtime. Jan approached the countess, who was having lunch, and tried to tell her that the boy needed to train because of the upcoming choice of heir. He would have to compete with his brothers for a place, and water does not flow under a lying stone. The mother agreed that her youngest son deserved to be the heir. Their family was famous for the greatest swordsman, and he was the son of the great Finn Ippolita. The boy looked at her and realized that now she would also encourage him to take up arms. But the woman said that she wanted her son to be happy. She wanted him to not be burdened by the fate of his family, and to choose his own path. Riley was delighted with her words, but Ian, on the contrary, thought that something was wrong with them both. He asked the lady if her younger son's behavior made her angry, because there was a big difference between the brothers' efforts. The mother replied that she had nothing to be angry about, and the boy kept telling him not to pay attention to other people's chatter. But the bearded man continued, reminding him how smart Riley was, because he started talking when he was 1 year old. He had seen a lot in his 60 years, but he considered the boy to be the most talented in the family. The boy learned to read early, and chose only the most difficult books. The mother replied that children with a penchant for science usually chose the pen over the sword, but the bearded man reminded him that they were the great family of swordsmen and begged him to take his side and influence the boy. Riley was enjoying their argument. He was fine with it. The old man and his mother still loved him for who he was, and he would never have to hold a sword. But the next moment, his carefree thoughts were interrupted by his mother's coughing, and there was blood on her arm. Yin rushed to her side, but the woman only whispered her son's name and fell down. The woman continued to cough up blood, and the boy didn't understand why this had to happen. They were doing so well, and he didn't have to grab for his weapon. Riley heard someone whispering behind him. He was sure it was someone who was happy with the situation. A red-haired woman peeked out from behind the door with a smile on her lips. She was Orly, his father's first wife. Ian shouted that the blood had finally stopped. The boy told him to leave his mother with him and run for a doctor, but he did not understand how Riley could help her. The boy recalled how he had read all the medical treatises. When he was 5 years old, he could give her first aid and take her to the hospital. The man promised to find a doctor as soon as possible, and the boy asked him to bring his wooden sword with him, which surprised the old man. Riley brought his mother to the room and tried to bring down the fever with a cold compress. He did everything he could for her. Jan came running with a doctor, and he began to examine the woman. He said that she had been poisoned, but the dose was not fatal, and there was a chance that she would recover. Now her life was not in danger, and the boy and the old man breathed a sigh of relief. But Riley did not really believe his words, because the blood from his mother's mouth looked more than threatening. The boy asked the old man if he thought what he did, and the old man agreed that it looked like an attempted murder. The maid who served them the food had already been arrested and was about to be interrogated, but they didn't know anything yet. The man bowed and apologized to the boy, saying that he should have been more attentive and noticed some details. Riley asked him if he remembered his stories about the other world that the boy sometimes dreamed about. He threw his wooden sword over his shoulder and said that it was not worth waking up evil while it slept. The boy said that he needed to talk to someone right now, and he asked the old man to look after his mother. He walked down the corridors and remembered his mother's smiling face. The boy remembered how in this life he only wanted to live carefree with the only person he cared about. But someone dared to encroach on her, and it was worth taking up the sword again. Riley found the red-haired woman, and he picked up the sword not as a warrior or a hero, and not for good at all, but for his only desire. The woman looked back at him with disdain, but the next moment she was happily inquiring about his business, mockingly calling him the master of the lazy sword. The boy replied that he was doing well, and thanks to her, not only he was. He and his mother would like to repay the kindness. But Orly continued the game, saying that she was the owner of the castle, and it was her duty to take care of everyone. The woman was very worried about Iris, the boy's mother, because everyone was laughing at him and spreading bad rumors. But now she could see positive changes, because the boy had finally picked up a sword, albeit a wooden one. Riley said that he had really started to change, and asked about the flavor of the soup that was served for lunch, and what he had smelled from the woman. Orly praised his keen sense of smell, and said she had been in the kitchen that morning, and the boy noticed that it didn't sound like her. The woman said that the same could be said for him. She advised him to sit in the corner, and not come out, and just keep doing what he always did. In the evening, Orly asked the maid she had sent to watch him about the boy. The man said that after talking to her, he went to practice with his sword, but it was obvious that he didn't even know how to hold it properly. The woman mockingly replied that one would not expect anything else from a lazy sword master. She ordered the man in the cloak to finish what he had started tonight, and to do it quietly. The masked man thought that perhaps the boy, who seemed so unconcerned then, actually realized that he was being watched, and was patiently waiting for his next move. The woman asked him why he had gotten up and ordered him to follow the order. He headed down the corridor. Riley's room was around the corner. But the next moment, a boy was waiting for him, swinging a wooden sword. Riley said he couldn't wait for him, his eyes glowing like a demon's. The mercenary wondered how the boy had managed to conceal his presence, and as he dodged the blow, he was sure of his previous clumsiness. But he was surprised to see a sinkhole in the stone floor of the palace. Meanwhile, the boy was shouting at him to wake up, because he was inattentive. He flew at him with a sword and asked if he was here on Orla's orders, but if not, she had wasted a lot of money. Because such a fool is not able to resist even a wooden sword, which the boy used to knock the weapon out of his hands and hit the unarmed enemy with the next blow. In the morning, Yang woke the young master up and told him that a dead body had been found in the mansion. The boy said that he shouldn't have woken him up for such a trifle. But the bearded man assured him that although his father had many enemies, this was a special case. Not just a corpse was found, but the corpse of an assassin who had somehow entered the castle. He was lying near Mrs. Orley's door with a broken neck. Ian said that the news of Lady Iris's poisoning had been passed on to the Count, and he praised the boy for helping her. But the bearded man was now worried about his safety, because there might be other murderers in the castle, and the old man was not sure that the boy would be able to defend himself. Closing the book he had fallen asleep on, Riley said he would take care of himself and asked not to leave his mother. He handed the old man a list of herbs whose medicinal decoction would help her. At the old man's surprised look, he replied that he could do more than just be idle and asked Jan to go to his mother, and he would be there as soon as he had taken care of some things. A bloody sword lay beside the bed, and the assassin's dagger gleamed. Sitting in his chair, the Count asked his two older sons about the results of the searches of the palace, but they found no one. He reflected that it was incredibly arrogant of him to come to the house of the sword masters unarmed, but it was also possible that someone had helped him. Judging by his clothes, he was from the Guild of Thieves or Assassins. The father told his sons to check out the village of Yipa first. Behind them on the couch, Orly was sitting and eavesdropping, nervously biting her finger glove. The woman did not understand where the mercenary's dagger had gone. Meanwhile, Riley woke up from his afternoon nap under a tree and asked the old man, who had just come in, how his mother was doing. The woman felt much better after taking his medicine, but the man was still worried about the boy's training and demanded that he finally take up the sword, because swinging it a few times and surrendering would not be enough. Riley laid down on his back under the tree and said that losing is also a good thing, and he could fight with a branch. The boy asked the old man to get some fruit from the tree for them, but the man said that they had plenty of fruit and could be served at any time. But when the old man looked up, he noticed a metallic sheen on the fruit. Noticing his interest, the boy asked him if he wanted some fresh fruit too. But the old man replied that now was not the time for them, and took a stone and knocked the metal object off the tree. The man caught a dagger in his hand. Its symbolism was the same as on the assassin's scabbard. The boy asked where it came from, pretending to be surprised. In the night city, two men met in a carriage. The red-bearded man asked the cloaked assassin about the third, how he died, and whether he committed suicide. The other man did not know how he died, but he said that his partner's body remained in the castle. The red-bearded man said that Lady Orla might be in trouble, and ordered the Furman to take the road to the village of Ipa. The hooded man asked if the bearded man was going to act alone, to which he replied that they should not be noticed, and that they had to do everything quickly. He had to help his daughter. The next day, Lady Orly could not find a place to sit. She cursed the fool for losing her weapons, which Ian and Riley had already taken to the Count. The next moment there was a knock at her door. It was her son Lloyd, and she was afraid it was Riley. She asked her son why he had come, because he was very busy. Lloyd just wanted to make sure she was okay, because assassin was found near her door. The son was worried that his mother did not look well, and he was glad she was resting. He said he would guard her room himself. Lloyd said that his grandfather's manufactory had moved to the village of Ipa. The woman asked if this was true, and the son said that these were the words of the servants who had recently returned from there, and it looked like a lot of workers had come. The woman thanked her son for the news and said that she was fine, so he could go. She wondered if the so-called workers already knew about the death of the third, the name of the dead assassin. And if her father had come too, it only meant that he had decided to end all problems in one fell swoop. The woman smiled and thought that in this case, Iris and her clumsy son would definitely not survive. Meanwhile, Riley continued to lie under his favorite tree, even though it was already night. Suddenly he heard someone whispering, voices discussing a plan. First, numbers 2, 4, and then 5 were to go first. The boy lay there thinking that they had decided to make their lives more interesting again. It seemed to him that the dagger he found would be enough to discourage them from going anywhere, but he would have to fight again. The assassins were making final preparations and were ready to move, sitting in a tree and finalizing their plan. Their goal was to steal the third's body to cover their tracks, one of them emphasizing the need to be careful and how all the residents of the estate were either current or former warriors. They were about to move when someone's voice asked them to wait. The three were immediately alert, and the man apologized for interrupting their important operation, but he had something to tell them. He had set them only one condition, that they should not get in his way and not invade the estate, and that he did not care about their other business. Leaving them time to think, the boy disappeared. One of the mercenaries asked if his partners had heard the same thing, but all the members of the guild had heard the statement. Another mercenary said that he hadn't heard anything about assassins in Iplet's family, and they were already considering canceling the operation. But their leader said they needed to end it once and for all. He would take the dagger himself, and numbers 2 through 9 would steal the body of their comrade. The others were to distract the residents of the estate, and if something went wrong, their task was not to leave any evidence and not to appear alive. 2 assassins stood in front of the door of someone's bedroom and discussed further actions. One of them said that even though the target was the Count's second wife, she might still have bodyguards. His partner said that they just had to do their job and stay hidden, and that it was a personal request from Lady Orley, and they couldn't leave without completing the task. He had heard that her son was so helpless that he didn't know which side of the sword to hold, so this was a good chance to get a promotion. The next moment, they were interrupted by Riley's voice, the boy reminding them of the ban on trespassing, and now they were in the wrong place. He stood in the middle of the corridor with a dagger and a rope, and since the boys had made their choice, it was his turn. The boy was pulling the rope with a smile, and asked them if they knew what adults do to naughty children. His partners were even glad to see him, because they didn't even have to look for this lazy sword master. They said that as a token of gratitude, he would get a quick death and attacked him. One attacked from behind, and the others seemed to be invisible. The boy let go of the rope, and the next moment one of the attackers froze. A dagger tied to the other end of the rope stabbed him right in the heart. His last thoughts were why he failed to notice the movement. Riley kept telling him that he shouldn't have crossed his path. Now they would die from the lazy sword master. The deceased's partner was surprised by such accuracy and one-hit killing, because they had been told that the target was weak. The boy was already waving a rope with a dagger at the end and said that he could hear them all, so let them come, but unfortunately they would not get out of the house alive. This enraged his partner, and he screamed at the guy, asking how dare he. His dagger was aimed at the neck, but the next moment Riley asked him to be quiet, and the attacker's hand and blade flew to the floor. The boy laughed at his great loss, and carelessly tossed the sword in his hand. The wounded man was panicking, and did not want to die like that, so he decided to run away, but the next moment a sword struck him in the back. Riley reminded him that he had warned them, and they had forced him to fight. When he finished, the boy took off his attacker's head in a leap. He said that he had hoped for an interesting fight, but the guys were worthless, and now he had to find the others. Yen and a short-haired maid stood back to back with their swords at the ready. The girl said that there were too many attackers, and asked how they got inside in such numbers. The gray-haired man rushed to the attack and shouted about their impudence to cross the threshold of his house. The man cut the 2 attackers in half with one blow and called them weaklings. The maid called out to the old man and said that she had already counted 15 on the way, and it looked like it was only going to get worse. Jan ordered them to fight to the end, and the girl decided to guard Lady Iris's room and let the old man find her son. The gray-bearded man ran down the corridor, thinking that the boy had always been good at hiding, and now he was sure to find a safe place. He just needed to wait for him. But the next moment, the enemy appeared in front of him. The assassin was slowly approaching with his hands in his pockets, and it was clear from his appearance that he was much stronger than the previous weaklings. Ian decided to politely ask him to get out of the way, and then he would stay alive. But this mercenary was not the most talkative, and immediately pulled out a dagger. The gray-bearded man emphasized that he did not have time for this, and rushed to attack. The mercenary easily deflected his blow, and leaped over the old man, attacking back. But his blade was also easily deflected. The old man said that he had no skills, and should not have entered Iplet's house with such skills. Jan struck with his sword, but the enemy slipped under it and rushed forward. The next moment, the blade entered the mercenary's shoulder. It was the weapon of one of his partners, and for some reason he failed to anticipate the attack. Meanwhile, the old man took advantage of the enemy's delay and stabbed him in the neck, and he fell to the floor. Yin remembered the young man and rushed to find him. Meanwhile, Riley stood there and didn't understand why he missed, because he was aiming for the heart. He thought that maybe it was because of the other body, and many years had passed, but he had done a good job. The boy decided to return to the image of a young aristocrat who did not know anything about the attack. Jan ran through the garden and called out to the boy, who responded sitting in one of the trees, and asked what the old man was doing here in the middle of the night. The man was glad that the young gentleman had been here all along, but now they had to leave together. The boy, as if surprised, asked if there was a new assassin. The gray-bearded man asked how he knew and explained the whole situation to him. Riley tried to show surprise, but he didn't have this skill in this world. The old man emphasized that in such dangerous times, it was better for a boy not to be alone. He and Sarah's mate had killed about 15 attackers on the way, but the boy was interested in what happened to his mother. Yang looked with tears in his eyes at the boy, who had been described as worthless and indifferent, but turned out to be very caring and only worried about his mother. The old man said that Sarah was guarding her chambers. She was a strong and brave girl, so they had nothing to worry about. They hurried inside and walked carefully through the corridors. The sword that Jan had warned him of the dangers was the sword of the Count himself. And while the old man was cautiously sneaking ahead, the boy was walking carefree behind him, and mentally telling him that everything was already clear. The man said that since the boy was the most vulnerable member of the family, he would be as careful as possible on the way, and asked the young gentleman to stay behind. Riley said he was grateful for the protection, and a second later took something out of his pocket. The boy said that the man must have seen something and pulled out a dirty piece of cloth and asked if this strange discovery could be related to the assassins. But the man just covered his nose and said that it looked like someone had wiped his nose with this handkerchief. The boy shouted that he might be lazy, but he wasn't dirty, and asked to take a closer look at the find. Ian picked it up with disgust and saw a recipe for soup poison. He thought he recognized the handwriting and was convinced of it with every word he read, but he thought it was impossible. Because, judging by the handwriting, it was Lady Airy who had attempted to assassinate Riley's mother. Meanwhile, the Count was walking through the library and said that the enemy was running from him, like all assassins, like a rat. When he found the mercenary, the man pulled out his sword and said that he couldn't handle him. The wounded assassin mentally agreed with him. Such a fight could be interesting if there were more of them, but now he was easy prey. He had already accomplished his task of getting the dagger and could now retreat. He needed to hold out for a few more minutes before the smoke screen activated. The Count rushed to attack and shouted that even if he begged on his knees, he would not spare him. The assassin only restrained his powerful blows and dodged. The Count activated the magic of electric charge, and his sword glowed in the discharges. He asked the enemy his last words. But Ian burst into the room, shouting that he knew who had attempted to assassinate Lady Iris. The Count's face was frozen with surprise. His first wife was standing next to Greybeard. The woman stood with a guilty look, and the man could not believe it. Jan asked who the man was standing next to his master, but he replied that this nobody did not matter, and he would kill him at any moment. The gray-bearded man held out a sheet with a prescription and asked the Count to look at it. He read out loud the list of ingredients, and the woman watched in fright. When he finished reading it, the Count looked at his wife with rage, because the handwriting was hers. The woman grabbed her head and began to sob. The boy, meanwhile, was lying on the floor in his mother's room, thinking that the old man must have delivered the note by now. This proof was to be the decisive one that would set the record straight. The next moment, Lady Iris woke up and saw her son on the floor and asked if he was all right. He told her about the attack and assured her that he was fine. She stroked his head and was happy that he was safe, and her son hugged her and was also happy that she was alive. This tender scene touched the warlike maid Sarah, and the next moment Yang was knocking on the door. He asked what his father had said about it, and whether the old man was right. The maid asked what he was talking about, and he told her that it was Lady Iris who had poisoned the soup. Iris's face was frozen with surprise. She asked if it was a joke, but it was her son who found the note with the culprit's handwriting. The woman still couldn't believe it and didn't understand her motives, and she fell to the floor in a fit of excitement. Although she knew she was hated, she did not expect this. The boy asked his mother to calm down and asked the old man what was wrong with his father. The man replied that he was having an interesting conversation with his wife, but they were joined by an unexpected guest. The assassin told Orla that everything was over and took off his hood. Although they got the dagger, they failed the task. The Count looked at the attacker's face in surprise. It was his wife's father, and now he understood why he was dodging. He asked how he could have disgraced his daughter like that. But Wari could not stand it. Clenching her fist, she shouted that the only one who had disgraced her was he. He had disgraced her when he took a second wife, when he became cold to her and kept his eyes on Iris. The Count interrupted her and told her not to talk nonsense, because all along she had only wanted his name. Even from the very beginning, when they married, he married her father's manufactory, not her. She was satisfied with this state of affairs, but now she has brought murderers into his house. So he has no right to say that he is to blame for anything, and let them both get out of his sight right now. The daughter and her father left the estate, and she complained that now everything was over. The woman would like to just wake up in her room and realize that it was just a dream. The father realized that this would happen sooner or later, and in a way, now he was relieved, and his daughter would somehow survive this blow. The man told her not to cry so much. Her sons would be better off than them. Their manufactory would continue to exist, and they would be able to start over. Nearby, someone was playing with a knife and throwing it in the air, and Wari was the first to notice it and call her father's attention. He asked what happened, and the next moment saw Riley with the blade. The boy asked if they enjoyed the fun. The man asked Riley what he was doing here, and he replied that he was here out of curiosity and revenge for his mother. He asked the furious lady what she thought about it, and she called him a premature bastard and the most worthless in the Iplet family. She shouted how dare he talk to her like that, and swung to slap him. The boy asked in surprise what she was going to do, and how the Count would react if he came back beaten. The father told her to stop, and addressed the boy himself. He couldn't understand the confidence of such a small bastard, and was going to put him in his place by taking out a dagger. He called the other assassins, and asked him what made him think he would return home alive. The boy lazily cleaned his ear with his finger, and told his grandfather that since he had not attacked him today, he would leave the question unanswered. But his mercy did not extend to Lady Orly, because she had twice tried to kill his mother. First by poisoning her, and then by sending assassins to their home. He could not forgive the double attempt, and the woman would pay for her actions. At that moment, the man threw a dagger at the boy's back. But Riley dodged it with a calm face, and told the man not to try to avenge his defeat today. The father and daughter were stunned that he was able to dodge, and the next moment, the woman was screaming for everyone to attack him now. She screamed for them to kill him, and wipe him off the face of the earth by tearing him to pieces. The mercenaries rushed at the boy, and he fended them off with a wooden sword, reminiscing about old times. He once spared the assassins because he thought they were ordinary people, but he was a naive fool. The boy cut down 4 attackers with one swing of his sword. With a smile on his face, he told others that he was no longer the man he was in his past life. The woman's father watched in horror as the boy, who had only trained with a sword once before, killed with a practice version. Riley went up to him and told him that he had just had his second experience, and that since the old man was a warrior, he would die quickly. The man fell to his knees and begged the young gentleman for forgiveness, begging him to take only his life. Begging not to harm his daughter, he insisted that she was not a bad person and just fell into bad company. But the boy refused him, and the next moment he struck. Riley's body was different in this life. He had been resting from fighting for 19 years, and his hand was now trembling. The boy clenched his hand into a fist and decided not to give in to emotions anymore. Meanwhile, it was already dawn and Sarah's maid was panicking. She asked Jan if he had found the young master. He was too defenseless, and she guessed that he had been kidnapped by the assassins. But Greybeard was sure that he was just hiding somewhere again, as he always did. But the girl insisted that this was a different case, because he had been in the room with Lady Iris and then disappeared. The old man got tired of the chatter and decided to make his rounds again, and the maid decided to do the same and was about to leave. But the Count was standing on the balcony, and the girl froze when she met his eyes. He asked why he had not been informed of his son's disappearance. Jan said that their young master was already out of favor because of his laziness and indifference to battles. So he was worried about what the Count would say if he found out that he had also been kidnapped. The Count was overcome with anger and ordered not to even look for him, because it was an incredible shame. His family does not need those who cannot defend themselves. At that very moment, a boy appeared and asked who was calling him. The old man and the girl were happy to see him, and Ian rushed to hug him. Sarah slapped him on the back of the head and yelled at him for not realizing how worried they were about him. The boy liked the hug better and would not have minded if the girl had done it too. The Count called his son and told him to go to his office. The father asked if he had really found the note, but the next moment Lloyd attacked the boy screaming. His mother ordered Riley to get out of the mansion, and he miraculously found the paper. The boy pretended not to understand, but this only made his brother even angrier. Lloyd accused him of forging the note and demanded an honest confession. Riley denied it, and the next moment his brother tried to push him, but he dodged and hoped that he didn't notice. Lloyd continued to yell and demanded to know what game he was playing with them, and Riley clenched his fist because he was not going to tolerate provocation. His father ordered them to stop, and his brother tried to argue, but his father wasn't going to say it twice. He said that poisoning the soup and inviting the assassins to the estate was her doing, and it had already been proven. The man turned to Riley and said that this was not an interrogation, but he needed to know where the paper came from, because it could not have fallen from the sky. The boy replied that even if they didn't believe him, he was able to fight off the attacker who came for his mother. Lloyd looked at him in surprise, and the boy continued to tell them that they probably knew about his training a few days ago. Although he was not good at holding a weapon, when the assassin attacked him in the corridor, he managed to fight him off with a wooden sword and escape. When the boy returned, the attacker was already dead, and he had this note in his hand. From this story, his father realized that Orly had let him in. Lloyd tried to deny it, and insisted that she would not do that. The father said that, although he could hardly believe it, it was she who let the murderers in, and that is why he had to drive her out. It was getting late, and the Count ordered his sons to leave. The boys agreed and were about to leave, but the father told Riley to come back tomorrow because they needed to talk in private. On his way out of his father's office, Riley met his oldest brother and tried to talk to him, but he ignored him. Leaving the two idiots alone, he moved on. Lloyd asked Lion what he thought about all this, and he said that it was unlikely that the youngest was lying. No matter how bitter he was about his mother, they shouldn't let their emotions get the better of them in a situation like this. In a way, Lion was grateful to Riley, if you think about the killers in their house. Lloyd didn't understand what he was saying, but his brother said that even though she was their mother, he couldn't forgive someone for murder. A contract killing was a crime, and there was no excuse. Lloyd asked if he really believed their mother was guilty, but he put his hand on his brother's head with a smile on his face, and said that for now, they would leave it at that. The time would come when the heir to the house would be elected, and after he was elected, they would be able to avenge their mother. These words brought tears to the middle brother's eyes with joy. The elder brother promised to restore order to the house after he received the right to investigate. And although the youngest was a lazy bum, his father had hopes for him in spite of this, and he could not be ignored. Wiping away tears of happiness, Lloyd understood and agreed with his idea. In the morning, Jan stood in front of the boy. He had everything in his hands to bring the boy to a normal appearance for the audience with the Count. He combed and rubbed the boy's hair to shine. When he was done, he said that the young gentleman looked 10 years younger, but the boy did not really want to look like a 10-year-old boy. Ian was delighted with the situation. He believed that Lady Orley's expulsion opened the door to his succession. Riley tried to run away from his admonitions, but the old man continued to chase him down the hall. He thought that maybe his father had called him to evaluate his skills and talents. The old man always said that the boy was the most talented of his brothers. Riley knocked and entered, and his father immediately told him to get ready to go, which stunned the boy. The man tossed his son a personalized invitation to the 17th Royal Tournament in a month. The boy thought that even though he was the only one who could participate in this tournament, his father could have started the conversation in a different way, instead of kicking him out of the house. Riley laughed in confusion and asked what he should do about it, because his father should know his response to an invitation of this kind. The man said he needed experience, and his brothers had already been to such tournaments. The boy replied that he didn't need that experience, and that since his brothers had already participated, they should go again. The man emphasized that it was a personalized invitation, and since he did not understand, his father explained to him that the letter was a declaration of love. This news did not amuse the boy, and he tried even harder to refuse. He said that he would not go and would not participate in the tournament because he was not good at anything. His father had already grabbed his head and asked him not to try his patience. But Riley reminded his father of the last time he tried to swing a wooden sword and his mother almost had a heart attack. Her reaction should have been seen. He asked his father not to force him, because it would not work anyway, and he did not want to pick up the sword. But his father said in a firm voice that he could do it, and the boy fell into memories where he was told the same thing. There, he was a soldier and a warrior, a chosen one, without whom nothing would work. The boy had to fight for his home and nothing else. When he regained consciousness, he told his father not to look at him like that. He would not participate anyway. The father got up and went to his son, saying that this time it was impossible to refuse, because he now had responsibilities and simply had no choice. The boy must defend the family name in this tournament. Riley started to back away. He didn't understand why he had to defend anything. Opening the door with his back, he slammed it into the old man, who was listening in. He made excuses that he was just cleaning the place, but the boy was not up to it and ran away. The Count ordered the old man to chase him. The boy hid in a closet and wondered why he needed the memory of his previous life, and how he was lucky to be born into a family of swordsmen. He understood the motives of his father, who wanted to pass on his craft to his son, but literally everyone in this house was skilled with a sword, including the maids. Only a few phrases from his past life made him go sour. He did not understand why he was being punished. The next moment, he heard Sarah looking for him, asking his mother where he might be. The Count hadn't spoken to him, and the tournament was coming up, and he was counting on his participation, but he had simply run away. The girl asked the lady if she knew about the rumors that her son would not be the heir, if she was not concerned. Iris replied that she was worried about it, and believed that he would be fine. He would sometimes look at her with an incredibly sad look and always say that nothing had happened and she had nothing to worry about. Although her son has changed a lot and she doesn't understand him, she is his mother and will do everything she can. Even when everyone is tired of his inaction, she will continue to love and support him. The woman just wanted Riley to be happy. She asked the maid if he was not boring her with his laziness, and they laughed together. Lady Iris asked the maid to help her because she wanted to move to another room, to which Sarah agreed and went to resolve the issue. When she was sure the maid was gone, she knocked on the closet and asked if Riley was hiding there again. The boy was surprised at his discovery, and the next moment made an excuse that he just wanted to be alone, which made his mother laugh. She told him that he could not hide forever. He had already done so at the time of the assassin's attack, and everyone was very worried about him. The mother asked him why he wanted to be alone and asked about the tournament. The boy replied that the mere thought of a weapon in his hand terrified him. The woman asked if he would go if he was accompanied by a beautiful lady. To his surprise, she replied that she would go with him. When Jan finished preparing the carriage, he asked if the lady had taken everything for the trip, and she asked if Jan and Sarah had everything they needed. Sarah said that it would be good to take at least 2 more people with them, but the boy replied that they were both enough, because he knew how fast they were. The Count arrived just before they were to leave. He took his beloved by the hands, and told her that she did not have to go with him. But she said she had already promised, and this was her first trip with her son. He touched her face to say goodbye, and she asked him not to delay it because it might upset someone. But he said that it would be good if no one upset him. The woman thought that he was jealous, but he realized that this was the only condition under which the boy agreed to participate in the tournament. The woman didn't want to argue anymore, and went to the carriage. The Count ordered his subordinates to save the lives of his wife and son at the cost of their own, and Sarah and Jan swore to fulfill their duty to the last drop of blood. They said goodbye to the Count, and the carriage moved off. Lady Iris shouted the word Solalo and was very happy about it, because she had not used it for a long time. The boy asked what it meant, and his mother replied that it was the name of their estate. Riley didn't know that this place had a special name, and the woman said that her father built the estate, and it was named after him. Eris asked the maid if she was born in Solia and in which district, and she said that she was in the right district. The territory of the Solalo estate was divided into left, right, and front Solia, with the castle in the center and a protective wall behind it. Sarah was telling the boy that Solia was a whole kingdom in one city. The girl said that there was something in Solia that was very similar to the drink the young man had mentioned so often. She tried to remember what he called it, but just started describing its properties. It was a drink that gave a pleasant tingling sensation to the tongue, and it tasted even better with ice. It was a heavenly refreshing drink, just as the boy had said. Riley stood up and shouted for details, and she called it the drink of the gods, sweet as wine without being intoxicating, and the color blacker than black. Riley remembered the name himself. His eyes lit up, and he shouted the word cola. The boy asked if this drink was really available in Solia, and the girl asked if he meant a non-alcoholic wine. Lady Iris was surprised to hear what he was talking about, and whether the girl had decided to drink it, and she replied that even small children drink this soft drink. The boy thought that if this drink was really available in Solia, then he should definitely go there, because he hadn't had it for almost 20 years. The next moment, the carriage stopped abruptly. Ian shouted about the attack, and goblins with shields and sticks were already coming at them. Riley thought that if they were simple goblins, Sarah could easily deal with them, and he wouldn't have to intervene. The old man was shouting that they shouldn't be allowed to surround the carriage, and Riley was nervously biting his nails. He watched the girl work, and although she was good at her job and had powerful blows, she was doing everything too slowly. He couldn't wait to try the coke, and now thought he should have taken more guards. There were more and more goblins, and Sarah was too slow, which made the boy go crazy and shout that he would do everything himself. The next moment, the boy was already near the girl, and she asked him how he got here and asked him to get back to the carriage quickly. But Riley was already in front of her with swords in his hands, asking why she didn't use her legs during the fight. He had just had a chance to try a coke, but because of the number of goblins and her slowness, everything would be closed and he would not be able to buy anything. The boy was eager to fight and said that if he just drew a circle and did not go beyond it, his movements would be fragmentary and not as effective, which would drag out the battle. He wielded both swords like a master, cutting goblins in half, talking about the need to keep a distance and attack the enemy with sudden short attacks. He kept saying that if he didn't deal with them quickly, they wouldn't see the day. The boy ordered Sarah to watch and learn, while he rushed from goblin to goblin and emphasized that it was faster and even easier. Sarah and Ian were just stunned to see his sudden bloody massacre, and how he calmly ended the fight and easily suggested that they continue on their way. The carriage moved on, and it was already getting dark. I asked the lady if she knew about the skills of the young gentleman, who was now sleeping peacefully, drooling. The woman said she didn't know anything about swords and all that stuff. She was just glad the boy wasn't hurt. The mother stroked her son's hair and said that she was very scared for him when he rushed at the goblins. Ian wanted to say something else, but Iris asked them to keep the situation a secret, even from the Count himself. The carriage reached the settlement in the morning, and Sarah welcomed the young Lord to Solia and was glad to be here, because she hadn't been to her homeland for a long time. Iris said that it had been a bad thing with Jan, whom they had sent to the castle of Solia alone, but the girl replied that it was for the best, because the old man would have been talking about those goblins all day, not lagging behind the boy for a second. And they had to follow the traditions of this city, namely eating, drinking, and having fun. She asked with joy where they would start, and the boy immediately replied with enthusiasm that they would start with cola, that black sweet non-alcoholic wine. The view of the whole city with dense buildings, decorated with colorful ribbons, and a tall fortress behind it, opened up before them. Sarah suggested they go to a cafe she frequented. They were sure to sell what they were looking for and would be able to hide from the sun. From behind the building, a man watched the trio, ordering the dark-haired girl to act and work for her bread, calling her a bastard of the magic tower. In front of him stood a long-haired girl in torn clothes, half of her face covered with either burns or scales. Riley was slamming his drink on the table with glee, tears welling up in his eyes. He had no idea that cola really existed in this world, and thought he would never try it again. He could not forget its fantastic coolness, and the tingling sensation that burned his throat. He stood up and overturned his chair and shouted enthusiastically that it was just right, attracting the attention of passers-by with his shouts. Iris and Sarah were surprised by his behavior, and the boy asked for permission to have another cup. The maid looked at him, as if he were an old drunkard. But the next moment there was shouting behind them. The dark-haired girl shouted that she hadn't done anything, and the man who grabbed her arm told her not to pay attention, because they had just caught a thief. Sarah couldn't just listen to the cries for help from this innocent girl, and was about to attack the men. But Riley grabbed her hand and forbade her to do so. He knew it was an act. He told her to just relax and ignore it, which surprised the girl. Riley explained that these three were only looking at her sword, whereas if she was really looking for help, the thief would have to look in all directions for a savior. The boy serenely held his cudgel, and asked the maid not to get involved in unnecessary problems. When he came to the chambers in the evening, Jam was already waiting for him, muttering something about wanting to do things his way and take part in the duel. The man tilted his glass and slammed it on the table, telling about his adventures in the castle of Solia. The gray-bearded man was buying 4 tickets to a fencing match. The saleswoman asked him where he came from, and when she heard about the county of Ippolita, she enthusiastically clarified whether it was true. The man handed her a letter from the clan with the count's seal on it. After reading it, the girl wanted to give out 4 tickets to participate in the duel. But Jan apologized and said that the seats should be for spectators. The girl then shouted in surprise what it meant for spectators, and now it moved the man to tears. He was beating his hands on the bed like a small child, and the boy didn't even know what to say. But the man continued, because that was not all. While the saleswoman was fiddling with the tickets, an old friend noticed him and greeted him with joy. Jen barely recognized the tall blond man and asked if he was really Schneider. The blond man asked about his life and whether he had also come to participate in the fencing competition. Schneider guessed that the old man had never married, and the man told him that he was just a butler at the Appellati estate. Hearing this, Billy immediately began to ask whom he served there. Was it the sharp sword of Lion, or maybe the swift Lloyd, or even the Count himself? He smiled and said that at his age, the answer was probably the Count. Without responding to the question, Ian asked the saleswoman when he would receive his tickets. Schneider was surprised to see the audience tickets, and the girl behind the counter mentioned that it seems the Count has a 3rd son, whose name was Riley. The blond man picked up on it, saying he had heard his other name, that he was called the Lazy Sword because of his carelessness. Ian was now sobbing in the chamber, and telling how ashamed he was. He could not bear to be humiliated in front of his old friend. The latter looked at him with such pity that the old mercenary hero of the past felt like crying. Greybeard could have told his old friend about the goblins, but Mrs. Iris had forbidden him to, and the situation was too unfair. In the morning, Sarah asked how the boy slept, and he looked so bad that he scared his mother. The boy said that he didn't think he should have come here, but the maid reminded him of the start of the competition tomorrow, which she was looking forward to because she had never seen it before. Rayleigh didn't want to hear about it, and just wanted to go home. He told how Jan had gotten drunk and kept saying the same thing in a circular pattern every half hour all night. The boy asked where they were going today, and Sarah said they were going to Provia Solia. Riley asked why exactly to the right, to which the girl replied that they didn't have enough time because the tournament started tomorrow, but the boy was interested in Lower Salt, which was obviously closer. Jen replied that it was dangerous and even dirty there, and the maid agreed and said that it was not the best place, even though she was from there. The boy had no particular desire to go there, so Sarah took them to explore the town. They crossed the threshold of the gates of the Temple of Solia, in the center of which stood a large statue of a hooded woman. This was the place where the goddess Irene worshipped and received her blessing. The wounded and sick were healed here, and the oracles received inspiration for their predictions. Once upon a time, Lady Irene was seriously ill, and now she came to express her gratitude to the priest who healed her. The boy looked around the temple, which did not stand out from similar places. The same parishioners and the same worship. And although they said that the goddess gave people the gift of prophecy, the boy did not understand how someone would give up their whole life and become a monk for this. Meanwhile, the priest his mother was talking to was happy for her, and said that she must be protected by the goddess Irene herself. Riley decided to explore the other parts of the temple, as it looked like his mother was going to be here for a long time. Ian noticed the beautiful architecture of this place, for which people came here from faraway places. The boy recalled how in his previous life he had met the saint in the same church, and as soon as she saw him, she immediately called him the chosen one of the Holy Sword. And from that moment on, his life changed a lot. Now this temple reminded him of his past life and how he managed to pick up that sword. When he reached the figure of the saint, the boy saw a nun kneeling in front of her. She immediately stood up and greeted the guests, saying that she was honored to meet the one who had been gifted by the gods, and welcomed them to the Temple of Solia. Jen greeted her and demanded that the boy do the same, but for some reason he stood silently by. The boy did not understand why he had to do this, but if she wanted to do it, he should first show his face hidden behind his cassock. The boy's words attracted the attention of the temple's parishioners, and the old man said that they had an important person in front of him. But Riley replied that he was also an important person, and the nun found this interesting and showed his face. Ian immediately recognized Saint Frisia and bowed to her, and apologized for not recognizing her immediately. Before them was the youngest of the holy virgins of the temple of Solia, and Jan demanded that the boy finally greet her. But the boy only mumbled about the same custom of worshipping living saints in this place. The boy told him not to pay attention to his words. He was talking to himself. Riley did not particularly like saints, rather he disliked them, and they even disgusted him. The boy recalled how the previous saint had proclaimed that he had been chosen by a sword and told him to take it and destroy the demon king. She said that only a warrior chosen by God could do this, and everyone agreed with her, even he. It was as if he was their only hope and savior, but now the boy did not understand how he could have fallen for it so easily. Now Riley just turned around and walked away. Jan whispered and asked him to at least show her his face so she could remember it. But he said out loud that the more he looked at her, the more he lost his appetite. Hearing this, the girl was outraged and followed them with her eyes. But the next moment she moved forward and asked him to wait for her. The boy was already wondering what she was going to say, and if she was going to pull out another sacred sword and talk about another demon king. The girl asked him to bend down a little and whispered something in his ear. The boy pulled away from her and asked why she was interested in such things. She judged by his reaction and thought she was right. Riley didn't understand why she would even bring it up, and she noticed his flaccid reaction at the sight of her face. The two of them were screaming at the top of their lungs, which made the patrons go crazy. The boy said that it was not proper for saints to talk about such things, but the girl was proud that she was still the youngest of them, and it was natural to be proud of that. The boy falsely praised her and told her that she could think whatever she wanted, and when she asked him why he was calling her by her first name, he said that her imaginary sainthood did not matter to him. He asked the old man if he was supposed to fall to his knees now, and if that was what was expected of him. The girl's gaze kept dropping to the floor, and Riley continued to tell her how much he hated them, which attracted even more attention from the others. He suggested that the girl go their separate ways and not annoy each other. Tears were welling up in the girl's eyes, and she could hardly contain herself. The monks offered her handkerchiefs, but she waved them away and refused. Riley asked what had happened to her. She was so sure of her sainthood. The girl blushed and tried to stop such communication with her, because it was already sacrilege. But the boy said that he had no religion and that she shouldn't call him a heathen by starting it. Riley told the old man that they shouldn't stay here and should leave. The monks comforted the girl, and she did not understand how she could have been told all this. One of them said that not all people like saints, but she didn't appreciate the support, and then the monks asked her to ignore his words. He was just another ill-mannered gentleman, but this only made the girl think that they thought the same about her. The monk assured her that she was the most holy after the goddess Irene, and possibly her incarnation in flesh and blood. The girl was already calming herself down and telling herself to stop thinking about him and go back to praying. But the next moment, it was as if she had been electrocuted, and she looked again at the boy leaving the church. She froze and could not believe it could be him. Jan asked the young man what the saint had asked him. The girl wondered if he didn't like men, but he told the old man that she was asking about his preferences. The man asked what it meant, but Riley said it was not important, and that it was simply not worth messing with the saints. Sir and Lady Iris were already waiting outside. The mother asked her son if something had happened in the temple, to which he said that nothing special had happened, and Ian just tried to keep quiet. Sarah suggested going to the magic tower, and mentioned the young man's interest in it. The boy was delighted with the idea of going there because he would like to learn how to move objects without his hands because it is convenient. The old man was seething, saying that magic is not studied for such purposes, and that there had never been a magician in Eiplit's family, so he shouldn't be fooled. The women just laughed at his grumbling, and the boy sighed heavily. When they got there, they saw a tower with blue magical streams enveloping its top. Riley said that there was a different atmosphere here, and the girl added that if they came closer, the air itself would feel different. Some people said it was because of the high level of pure mana that hovers around the top of the tower. The boy was interested in stories about magic, and in his previous life he had no unusual skills. All he had was that cursed and blessed sword, and the fields of the dead that he had to walk through by force. He was forced to live the life of the chosen one, and it constantly pressured him. He certainly wouldn't want to go through that again. Riley believed that with magic it could be completely different, especially since now his future was decided only by his choice. He wondered if his passion for magic could cure him of the traumas of his past life. Sarah told him about the mind-measuring device on the top of the tower. The girl said that everyone who wants to become a magician has to undergo such a test, and offered to do it to the boy. She said that since he had such a chance, the young man should try it. His brothers had already undergone this test to master the technique of the magic blade sword. The older one manifested mana at 12, and the younger at 14. Since Riley hadn't had the opportunity before, his mother encouraged him to try it. Even Ian was burning with anticipation. He knew that now was the time to show everyone the young master's abilities. He, as a mercenary hero, was the best in combat magic during the Great War, and the first to realize Mr. Riley's potential. And finally, the time had come when he could get rid of the stupid nickname of the Lazy Sword. They went inside the tower, the same magical streams and various objects floating in the air. Even the stairs to the top were just hanging in the air. The building seemed bigger from the inside than it was from the outside. Sarah didn't know the details, but it was due to some special device. Even the other people inside looked somehow special. The next moment, a young man with glasses approached them and asked them why they had come. Ian replied that they had come to inspect the tower, but the guy said that not everyone could get in and wanted to see their documents. After receiving them from the gray-bearded man, the guy allowed them to see the first floor, but they could not go up to the second floor without permission. And just as he was about to say that nothing could be touched with his hands, Riley was already reaching for a giant levitating blue stone. The boy with glasses grabbed him by the arm screaming and pulled him away from the stone. Riley said he was just curious, but the guy with the glasses said that even the plan from the Count's family was not allowed to touch it. He asked if they even knew what it was, but when Riley asked, the boy said he couldn't tell them. The boy was already holding his hand to his head and explaining that there were signs next to each object that said whether or not the artifact could be touched. Lady Iris asked the boy to show them around, as it was the first time they had been here, and he gladly agreed. His name was Ferda, and he stood in front of huge shelves of books and told them about the existence of many different kinds of magicians. Among them were wizards, sorcerers, and alchemists, but if we were to list them all, it would take more than a day. Ferda said that most of them wrote magic books and showed one of them in his hand. A minute later, the boy was enthusiastically showing an exhibit that turned water into ice and trying to explain how it worked. But Riley explained that it looked like a refrigerator, and when the guide asked him what it was, he had to answer that he had just made up a word. The guide led them to the center of the hall, saying that to get to the second floor, they would have to go through a certain procedure. From above, they could see beginners practicing magic, such as throwing a fireball. Riley was interested, and everyone else was waiting for him near the yellow ball in the center of the hall. Sarah said that this was the mana meter that the young man wanted to try. Ian was standing next to him, and he was just burning with impatience and could no longer watch the boy hesitate. But when he finally agreed, the bearded man beamed with happiness. The boy looked at the ball and asked Ferd how to use it. The guy with the glasses said that he just needed to raise his hands above the sphere. Then it would start to glow and fill with water depending on the owner's mana level. Ian asked the boy what would happen if the owner's mana level exceeded the sphere's limit. He thought it might explode. Ferda replied that such a person would definitely be invited to study at some magic school, especially if it was a child. But he had never met such a strong person before, and he believed that the sphere could only crack. The boy joked that they were not dragons after all, and the only one who had caused a crack in it was the great mage Astroya. During the Great War, he had defeated a famous mercenary hero, but he couldn't remember his name. Jan coughed up his words, and the women started laughing. Ferda saw that Greybeard had high hopes for Riley. He decided to start right then and there, and put his hand on the sphere. The boy was expecting something big, but he didn't see anything at all while holding his hand on the sphere. When he finished, everyone ran to the sphere to find out the result. Ferda said it was an average result, but Ian couldn't bear it. He thought it must be a mistake. Riley was happy with his average level and seriously asked if he should become a magician. The guy with glasses said that it was a pretty good result, and he would be better off learning everyday magic. The old man still didn't believe in his average level. Ferda asked if he was okay, but the next moment Yang went crazy and grabbed the magic ball. The boy tried to calm him down, because it was wrong to treat a magical object like that. But the man kept shouting that there was a mistake, and meanwhile Riley was asking what he was having for lunch. The mother said that Sarah had organized everything. The girl had booked a table at the right salt restaurant. Sarah told the old man to leave the balloon and come with them, and the boy who was holding him back asked for help. But Yin was not going to let her go, so the girl shouted that the young man had used magic and pointed behind him. The old man hoped that Riley had actually directed his mighty power to another object and looked back. But at that moment, Ferda snatched the ball from his hands, and he was left screaming with nothing. The girl was already grabbing him and dragging him to lunch. On the way out, Greybeard was still shouting that he couldn't just leave, because the young man's great talent was at stake, and he himself couldn't survive all those disappointed looks and the nickname of lazy swordsman. Ferda finally breathed a sigh of relief and put the ball back in its place. The evening came, and the boy started sweeping the hall. He was surprised at the amount of energy the old man had, but the young gentleman was touching everything with his hands. One of the mentors came down the stairs and asked the boy if he was on duty today and noticed his tired appearance. But the next moment, their attention was drawn to the crowd, which had gathered around something and was loudly wondering. The mentor decided to get closer and find out what it was. He looked back at the boy with glasses in horror, and without saying a word continued to stare at the object so that the boy ran to look. Another mentor asked who was on duty today, and Ferda still couldn't see what was so surprising. He asked what happened, and the next moment he saw a large magical blue stone. It was full of cracks, and its fragments were floating around him along with the magical streams. He did not understand how this was possible, because it is used only by great magicians, and who made it. The mentors discussed that even though they did not know who it was, if the mage Astroya found out about it, there would be a lot of noise. They thought that they needed to find the culprit first, otherwise they could be blamed. But they had no clues, so they needed to know who had visited the first floor today. They asked Ferd, who was on duty and trying to sweep the floor despite everything. But before they could speak, a stone broke into pieces behind them, causing them to scream and be heard outside the tower. A mother and son were walking down the street holding hands. She asked him if he was tired, because there was a lot of new things happening here, and the boy didn't seem too interested. Riley said that a lot had happened today. He had been to the temple and the magic tower for the first time in his life. But in fact, he was thinking that he had met a sacred maiden in that temple, whom he definitely did not want to see because he was afraid of her predictions. And in the tower, he had to collect mana in a slightly unusual way so that no one would notice. But he told his mother that since nothing unusual happened, it was a good day. The woman asked what could have happened to them, accompanied by Jan and Sarah, but turning her gaze to her husband, she said that this time something happened to him. Sarah was still trying to calm him down, because he did not believe what had happened and that it was nothing outstanding. Riley asked his mother if she was disappointed with her ordinary son, but the woman smiled and said that she was relieved. Two boys were sitting in an alley in the evening city. One of them said to Beta that they might get caught if they continued. But Beta said that the secret always comes out, but today they were working in vain. The guy asked if he really offered to pick pockets on the day of the festival. He replied that they needed to get down to business, otherwise they would have to wait until next year. Beta was looking for a target in the crowd and noticed a white-haired boy, but his partner assured him that he was definitely a count and had security behind him. Then Beta called out to Hamel again and pointed to the carefree boy with a joyful expression. These seemed to be the same people who pretended not to see the attack on the girl. The partners looked at the target, and apparently the fool was accompanied only by his mother, one maid, and that unfortunate old man. Hamel asked if his partner had really chosen them for the attack, and the man assured him that these heartless people needed to be punished for their callousness, and that it would not even be considered a crime. His partner had seen 2 aristocrats and only 2 servants, so the 4 seemed like an easy target. But Hamel had a bad feeling, and Beta reminded him that they had no choice. The partners agreed and moved forward. They mingled with the crowd and signaled each other to start. The guys were going to attack at the same time, and everyone started to act. No sooner had Hamel approached than he was spotted by the old man and received an elbow to the chest. Jen knocked him down with a kick to the leg and asked who they were. Trying to get up, he noticed that the maid was already twisting his partner's arm. The old man asked if they really thought they could attack young Mr. Iplid with impunity, which made Hamel's blood run cold. The boy had heard of an aristocrat who had achieved his status only through the sword. Sarah knocked the other attacker to the ground and immediately remembered where she had seen them. The young gentleman was right about them, and now the girl wondered where they were from, but the boy remained silent. She could smell the stench and decided that they were from Nizhnya Solia. Beta began to smell himself and claimed that he was wearing perfume, but the girl said that the smell of a commoner cannot be easily overpowered. Since she was from these parts, she would have mercy on them this time, but they would have to pay for their attempt to harm her. Sarah crushed the palm of the attacker's hand with her foot and ordered him to choose his target better next time. Meanwhile, a mother and son were enjoying the festival delicacies and asked Jan where Sarah had gone. The man said that she was away on business and that they both needed to talk. But the boy didn't want to leave and mumbled that since they were both already in business, they should do their best. Ian was surprised at his awareness of the situation, but the boy pretended not to say anything. Riley continued to walk with his mother and eat the goodies, and she even offered to wipe his face because he was too excited. But the next moment, he was distracted by a whistle, followed by flashes of fireworks in the sky, and they all watched in awe. Sarah looked up at the sky and said that it had finally begun, and Lady Iris beckoned her to join them and asked what she was talking about. The fireworks marked the beginning of the fencing competition. In the morning, the fun continued, and the festive atmosphere was complemented by confetti floating in the air. The 4 had already taken their seats, and the fencing festival was about to begin. Seer was well prepared for the event, and had brought a whole tray of food and drinks with her. Jen assured her that this time there would be good fighters. The boy was eating his meat, and asked the old man about the program, and the latter said that it was hanging at the entrance. But Riley continued to chow down, and said that he hadn't looked closely, and the old man just lowered his head. Sarah said that there were only 3 sparring matches in the program, and that the show would most likely end before dinner. The boy looked around at the empty seats. It seemed to him that there were fewer people here than outside, and his mother also thought that it would be busy. But Sarah told him that ordinary people could not get in without an invitation letter, because the competition was between the descendants of aristocratic families. But that didn't mean they couldn't see the action, and the girl pointed to a flying crystal in the sky with a sphere on top and magical streams enveloping it. With its help, anyone can watch the action. The boy said that now some nobleman would be disgraced, and it would be shown to everyone. But the girl objected. She said that the broadcast is shown with a delay for a whole day. The broadcast is controlled by mages from the tower, and they can cut out not very suitable shots. Riley thought that even though he was stuck in the Middle Ages, technology was still replacing magic. The start of the fight was announced, and the audience began to cheer. The aristocrats began shouting at each other, trying to get the others to shut their mouths because their sons were entering the arena. Jan, with his arms crossed over his chest, did not understand why they were shouting, and did not understand their fervor. But the others understood that if a young gentleman entered the arena, the man would shout them all down. The gray-bearded man said that 2 participants from the families of Boran and Dreis were entering the arena. The 2 boys bowed to each other before the duel, and the old man added that both families were known for their swordplay, but they were no match for the house of Ippolit. The judge raised his hand, signaling the beginning of the fight. Sarah was excited to see it begin and watched the duel with delight. The swords of the opponents crossed in lunges. No one wanted to lose, and they fought as if for real. The boy said that it was interesting to some extent. He could see techniques he had not known before. He thought that there were no more techniques in the world that he didn't know, but here he met unusual techniques. When Ian asked if he really liked it, Riley said that it was like playing in a sandbox. The fight was boring and interesting at the same time. It may be strange, but that's what he came for. Sarah added that the young gentleman had been chopping down goblins left and right, that he was ready for this fight. Jan said that the boy should take part himself, but he was too lazy. The man did not understand what it meant, but Riley said that he liked his nickname of the lazy swordsman, and it was not a joke. Ian didn't understand why he was trying to hide his talents, but at the same time he noticed the real expression on the guy's face, which looked extremely tired. He thought that the boy was not only hiding his abilities, but also wearing a mask all the time, and he wondered why he had adopted that nickname in the first place. Lady Iris interrupted his thoughts. She thought that her son liked this nickname because it was just more interesting for him to live. The woman said that he needed to find him a bride, and Riley took a deep breath right into the cup of cola he was drinking, and it blew up in his face. Ian and the boy asked her if she was serious, but the woman smiled and said she was just kidding, because the old man's face was too serious. The boy said he needed to leave, and Ian went with him. Riley held his head and told him that he hadn't been caught off guard like that in a long time, and what all the talk about the bride meant. The next moment, someone called out to the boy, and behind them stood a man in a suit and a red-haired girl. Crossing his arms over his chest, the man said that he was addressing the boy, who had used some harsh words. Riley asked what he could have said, and Ian noticed the man's rudeness. The man in the suit reminded him of the childish jokes that allegedly took place in the arena. The boy had no idea how hard the participants were preparing for the sparring. He demanded that he take back his words, and that he would forgive him. Riley said briefly that he was wrong and gestured goodbye to him, taking the old man with him and walking away. But the man in the suit demanded that he stop, that his words were not sincere, and that he thought it looked like a real apology in this case. Riley lazily asked what the man wanted this time. The man couldn't stand his behavior and introduced himself. His name was Aplok, and he was the eldest son of the Arenzium family. He put his fist forward in a threatening manner, and his yellow eyes glowed with anger. The man was going to teach the boy a lesson on behalf of all the participants in the competition. The next moment, pointing his finger at the boy, he demanded that he tell him his name and family. The boy thought he shouldn't have said that, but it had been his problem even in his previous life. Jan looked at him and asked what he was going to do, and the boy said with a serious face that there was only one way out. The next moment, the boy rushed to the door, followed by a man and a red-haired girl. Jan stopped them with his arms outstretched to his sides. He could not let them go any further. But the man slipped under his arm, and added that although the old man was still nimble, it was now 2 against 1. Aplok reached the boy, shouting that he would punish anyone who disrespected the honor of the nobility, and grabbed him by the shoulder. The next moment, Riley intercepted his arm and said that he had already apologized, but the man, though writhing in pain, was not going to give up so easily. He did not understand why the boy was so strong, and the next moment tried to activate the magic. His hand was enveloped in streams of energy, and the boy didn't even react to it, because it was simply nothing against his mana. The energy reflected back into the attacker's hand, and he screamed in pain. The red-haired girl screamed in surprise, and Ian was surprised too. Aplok didn't understand who this guy was or how he did it, because it didn't look like he was using mana. Riley was still holding his hand, and asked him why he was being so mean to him, squeezing it harder and harder. The red-haired girl ran to help the man, and Riley threw the attacker right at her, and shouted that he just wanted a quiet life. The man was trembling, and the girl was unconscious. Behind them was a smashed wall. Riley came close to him, and whispered to listen to him carefully, asking if he was taking pills, because he could smell them from a mile away. And if he didn't want to be found out, he should be quiet. Sweat broke out on the man's face, and he agreed, frightened. Riley ordered him to keep quiet about what had happened here, or he would get him out of the ground, whether he was an Arenzium or an Orangium. Ian saw the man's reaction from afar, and asked the boy what he had said to him. The boy, with an indifferent expression, put his hand on the old man's shoulder and asked him to take care of everything here, and if anyone had any questions, he should say that he did it himself. Riley asked him to do him this favor, and he would cover for him in front of the women. The boy returned to his seat alone, and his mother noticed that he had been there for a long time. Sarah asked where Jin had gone, but it seemed that he had big problems there, and left without waiting for him. The girl asked if he had heard any sound like an explosion just now. The boy replied that he didn't think so, maybe it was the old man, and he noticed that she had good hearing in such a noisy place. Riley sat back and enjoyed his cool Coke. A new fight was about to begin, and he asked what was the highlight of this particular fight. Sarah told him that one of the participants was considered a candidate for the championship, and many people expected him to do well, including her. The girl pointed to a participant in a blue cloak who was carrying 2 swords at once. The boy thought that he looked good. Lloyd was the same at his age. Sarah said that he was the only one who was using 2 swords now, so she expected a good fight. She said that he was a member of the Janir family, and this was his first participation in such a competition. The boy wondered how he claimed the championship at the first time, and whether he was overrated. The girl told him about the existence of secret fights between the participants of the upcoming tournament. There were rumors that he used some unusual technique there, and allegedly he surpassed even the Iplet clan. The mother and son looked at her in surprise, and she added that it was written on the ticket. But the boy emphasized that when it came to swords, their clan always came first, and it turned out that they did not benefit from his good results. Sarah said it was nothing of the sort. She was pleased to see his courage and boldness. The judge announced the rules to the newly arrived participants. The match was to continue until the opponent was pushed off the field or immobilized. The participants were allowed to use mana, but if they threatened the life of their opponent, they would be disqualified, and this was decided by the judge. The participants confirmed that they understood everything, and the duel began. The guy with the 2 swords confidently took a fighting stance and was ready to fight, while the guy opposite was trembling with his sword forward. From their looks, it seemed that the winner was already decided. Riley asked the girl if she knew anything about the boy with 1 sword, and while she was recalling, the judge had already given the go-ahead for the fight. It seemed to Sarah that he was from Arenzium, and while she was telling him this, the boy in the blue cloak lost 2 of his swords at once. They flew into the air, and the trembling boy struck a decisive blow against his unarmed opponent. When Riley heard this name, he remembered Aplok, who seemed to him to be the eldest son of the family. This meant that the boy in the arena could also use something forbidden. The guy in the blue cloak was immobilized, and the judge announced the winner by raising the hand of Aplion, the second son of the Arinzium family. The boy was happy that he had really won, but Riley thought that although the smell was not as strong as his brother's, he had not won by his own efforts. It was also strange that Ian was taking so long to deal with their new friends. Something could not have happened. Sarah, meanwhile, was disappointed with the fight. Her favorite had suffered a crushing defeat, but the next moment she was already offering the hosts a snack. The boy stuffed his mouth and was still thinking about the old man, hoping that nothing had happened there. At this time, Jan was picking up the girl from the floor. Although she asked him to help her master first, the man assured her that thanks to his mana, he should have less internal injuries, and that she was the one who needed help first. Ian recalled the boy's words about his quiet life and his unexpectedly strong throw by a man who had quite good abilities and did not seem weak. The old man realized that no matter how talented others were, this was a manifestation of the young gentleman's skill. And perhaps then he deliberately released only a tiny part of the mana in the tower. The old man decided that his young master was a dragon who had descended to earth, a supreme being who had lived for more than 10,000 years. Sometimes they took human accounts for fun. The old man really couldn't think of any other explanation for such great power at such a young age. It couldn't be because he himself had been present at his birth. But then it could mean that Lady Iris was actually a dragon and had been hiding her tail under her dresses all along. This would explain his extraordinary powers, but at the same time, the woman almost died of poison. And a majestic dragon can't be harmed like that, unless it was due to human error. Ian tried to recover from his thoughts, but the main thing was that his young master was an outstanding person. He shouted his last words aloud, and the wounded begged the madman to let them go. The old man began to think again. He remembered how Lady Iris had asked him to keep the battle with the goblins a secret, and now he had to keep quiet. Jan was dragging his new friends along when someone called out to him from behind. He was about to ask what they wanted, when he turned his head and saw Saint Frisia, accompanied by priests and armored guards. She was informed that there was a guest who had visited their church. Jan was worried that because of the boy's pranks they had come all the way here to get him. But it seems that Frisia had heard the cry about the young lord's majesty, and asked the old man how long he had known about it. Sarah was stretching on the podium. She was surprised that her boy, for whom she was so rooting, had lost in a second. Lady Iris asked if there would be any additional competitions, because the fights ended earlier than she expected. But Sarah answered that additional fights are prohibited by the rules. But today was only a warm-up and tomorrow they should have more interesting fights. The girl still did not expect such a fight from a member of the Arinzium family. The strength of this guy's punch could match that of Mr. Lion. Iris asked him to compare him to Riley, and the girl replied that if she hadn't seen the recent events in the forest on her way here, she wouldn't have even tried to compare them. But then the young gentleman surprised her and even impressed her, unlike the son of House Arinzium, who did not tremble or doubt his actions. But what surprised her most was his cool and serene look after the battle, and she could not say for sure who was stronger. Sarah wanted to ask the young man himself, but he disappeared again. The mother explained that he had decided to check on Yang because he had been gone too long. Sarah joked that the old man would have to be informed about the young gentleman's independent walks, and the women laughed because he would have a reaction. Lady Iris said that perhaps Riley was not after Jan at all, but was looking for a bride. Sarah thought it was just a joke, but it seemed that the mother was really worried about her son's match. The next moment, the women went in search of the two themselves. A crowd had gathered in the corridor, and it looked like something had happened. The old man seemed to be in the center of the action, but the boy was not with him. The girl tried to understand why the abbots and knights of the Temple of Salt had gathered there. The next moment, Frisia apologized for blocking the road like that, but they were looking for people from the Iplet family. Her words surprised both the girl and the mother. Meanwhile, the boy stood outside the building where no one was, and thought about the fight with a member of the Arenzium family. He held the mask in his hand and thought that he had bought it at that fair for a reason, because if that idiot didn't keep his mouth shut, things might not go as he would have liked. It looked like Jan had just said goodbye to the two, but for some reason they were heading toward Lower Salt, even though it was a long way away. The boy climbed down the castle walls, thinking that they were going to get some goods. Meanwhile, one of yesterday's attackers woke up in the tunnel, and Hamel was glad to be alive. He definitely did not expect that those 4 people were from Iplet's house. He was so unlucky to meet them, and yet so lucky to survive. Now he didn't know whether it was morning or evening, but since the magic lights were turned on again, it looked like he had been sleeping here for a whole day. He called out to his friend to see if he was still alive. Beta said that he was, and that dragging him here by himself made him feel even worse. He cursed that maid over and over again, and Hamel asked if he was okay. But the guy shouted that it definitely didn't look like he was okay. Showing his broken arm, he complained that it was over. But his partner consoled him that he only needed to go to the church to see a doctor once, and he would be fine. But Beta laughed. He did not believe that the noble upstarts from the temple would even talk to a resident of Lower Solia. Hamel tried to calm him down, but he got up and was going to take revenge on them. Although he couldn't do it himself, he was going to use that monstrosity from the magic tower. His partner shouted at him to stop and forget about everything that had happened, but he didn't listen and was already yelling at someone, ripping off a person's blanket. He shouted at the dark-haired girl to wake up. Nini asked what happened and he told her his request. The guy said that he could not do without her help, and that was the only reason he asked for a favor. The girl stood up and agreed to help, and the guy was happy about it and said he was counting on her. In the middle of the street of the Night City, a carriage was driving, and the winner of the last duel was telling his brother how he had knocked 2 swords out of his opponent's hands with one blow and knocked him out. But the older brother, sitting across from him, was trembling. He didn't even seem to be listening to him, and only his younger brother's hands, which tried to stir him up, brought the man to his senses. The boy asked him what had happened, and although he tried not to say anything, his face gave everything away. His younger brother asked him to trust him, because he had never been so nervous even during competitions. Aplok didn't want to hear anything and threw his brother back into his seat, repeating that nothing had happened. Once he calmed down, he assured his younger brother that he was fine and not to worry. Meanwhile, the masked man was sitting on top of the carriage and was glad that the fool knew how to keep his mouth shut, because he almost had to remind him of that. The next moment, Riley felt a sense of danger, wondering who dared to cross his path. 2 figures stood in front of the carriage driven by the red-haired girl. Nini asked Beta if this was their target, but he remembered the boy as a completely different person. For some reason, he was alone now, and riding on someone else's carriage. The girl didn't know the answer to these questions either, but she was sure he was the one they needed. The red-haired woman yelled at them to get out of the way, and at that moment Beta ordered the girl to kill the boy. The boy laughed at their arrogant attempt, and the next moment a bolt of black and purple lightning flew out of the girl's hand. It struck the red-haired girl and threw her brothers out of the carriage. Meanwhile, Riley easily jumped to the roof of the house. This time the boy was surprised. He had never seen such magical skills even in his previous life. Someone had used magic, and black magic at that. The girl in the cloak followed the enemy, who managed to escape from the attack. Riley tried to remember where he had seen this face before, and recalled the scene with the thief. Nini was delighted to be entrusted with this case. Someone needed her, and only she could handle it. The dark-haired girl couldn't let her master down. She stretched her hand forward again, and this time she was going to release a huge amount of energy. Many bolts of energy with lightning were forming above her. Riley was mesmerized by this sight, but he felt that it could be dangerous. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying to explain that Mr. Riley had been sitting next to them the last time, pointing to his seat. The girl from the temple asked where he could have gone after that, but the maid said he was going to the bathroom. Sarah's gaze burned into the old man, and she knew they needed more escorts. Lady Iris asked Saint Frisia what she was going to do, and if she was going to wait for the boy here. The girl did not answer, and only took the cup he was drinking from. Jan wondered what she was going to do. Perhaps she would use her divine powers, granted by the goddess Irene herself, right before his eyes. He was glad that his young master would be searched for in this way. Frisia looked at the chalice carefully, and the next moment smashed it in her hand with anger, surprising everyone. When she came to, she asked Lady Iris what she was talking about. Seeing this, the old man could not find a place for himself, because it meant that she was here because of the young gentleman's rudeness yesterday, and it would be better if the boy could avoid her. The next moment, the silence was broken by one of the abbots, who came running with news. He told us that something terrible had happened in the central district, and the next moment a flash of thunder illuminated everyone. At that moment, bolts of dark energy were destroying houses. Passers-by were begging for help, and one of them's hands was burning with black fire. Riley watched in fascination, because he had only seen such things in books and heard stories, but this was the first time he had seen them with his own eyes. The girl did not hold back and tried to hit the enemy, but the boy managed to dodge her blow every time. Riley looked at her young face and wondered how someone of her age could be so skillful at this level of magic. The next moment, the cloaked girl was approached by the guards, who held their swords at the ready and demanded that she surrender. But before the man could speak, he was struck by black flames. Riley thought that Sarah shouldn't be called here, but Ian's skills would be just right. He could have tried to use the Arenzium brothers, but they were lying like firewood in the middle of the street, unconscious. The boy really didn't want to interfere, and the next moment he was dodging a series of fireballs, whose black fire destroyed everything in its path. Riley admired how easily the girl could handle magic. Maybe he should master it too. It seemed much easier than the art of the sword because it did not require physical strength. He was attracted not only by the various magical techniques, but also by the possibility of teleportation. The girl pointed her hand at him again, and the next moment a giant ice spear in the form of a sharp block appeared behind her. The boy, pulling out his sword, shouted at her to finally realize who she was dealing with, and the next moment cut the block in half. The girl froze in surprise, and Beta yelled at her to kill him instead of standing there. When Riley saw him, he remembered the boy and thought of Sarah and January. Because of their kindness, this had continued, and now he would have to clean up their mess. He prepared his sword and was going to deal with him once and for all. Meanwhile, in the magic tower, the mentor was shouting at the boy with the glasses, demanding that he bring the culprit right now, before Master Astroya noticed the stone was missing. Ferda walked down the street and held his head. He was afraid that he would be expelled from the academy, but he knew nothing about the person who could do that. He remembered the boy who almost touched the stone. He seemed to be the only suspect. The guy with the glasses tried to remember his name. He seemed to be from the Eiplet family, nicknamed the Lazy Sword. But there was nothing special about him. Even his mana level was insignificant. It couldn't have been this lowlife, because even the Grand Master couldn't break off a single piece of stone. And the guy had only barely touched the stone with one finger. This version seemed so stupid, and no one would believe it. The next moment, Ferda noticed a flash. He heard the crackling and vibration of the explosion as he put his hand to the ground. He knew for sure it was a fireball. Standing up, he was almost knocked down by people fleeing from a wizard who had gone mad and was about to blow everything up. The guy with the glasses wondered what kind of madman had dared to use magic without permission, and in the central square. He broke into a run and thought he had to stop him. But in the midst of the events, he saw a girl who seemed to have been kicked out of the magic tower, and it was she who was launching those magic balls. He looked at her target, and the guy was just cutting the fireballs with a regular sword. The girl was also shocked, because she was sure that the guy had a simple steel sword, but he somehow deflected all her attacks. Although it was theoretically possible, he did it with extraordinary ease, and without any apparent use of mana. The next moment she started coughing up blood, but she couldn't let her master down, who had trusted her, and continued. She was going to attack the guy with a lot of small blows instead of putting her energy into one powerful one. The next second, she sent hundreds of magic arrows at the target, and all of them were deflected by the same sword. Riley noticed that before that, the attacker had used much stronger attacks that he could easily dodge, but now they were very weak. The boy tried to understand what she was doing, because the girl froze again. Beta yelled at her and asked if she was capable of anything at all, but the girl assured him that she would fulfill her promise to her only friend. She promised to do it even if it cost her life. The next moment, dark energy was dripping down her cheek with a burn right out of her eye. Riley thought that something was wrong. The color of her mana was unusual. In her previous life, those who had it had unique abilities. But now it seemed that the magic was unstable and dangerous even for the one who used it. The girl was coughing up blood again, and blood from her eye was already pouring down her cheek. The boy realized that she couldn't even control it, and couldn't just leave it alone. The next moment, someone was shouting to pay attention to the boy, and someone in the crowd said that now they didn't have to run away because they were protected. Riley was immediately overwhelmed by memories from his past life. People were just as excited about his arrival because the warrior would save them all, and they needed his help. They called it his destiny, because he was a warrior who could handle anything. The girl ordered Beta to run away. She realized the strength of the enemy, and said that at least he would survive. Beta grabbed her and shouted that this senseless animal should not dare to die just like that. He told her that she would become just a pile of garbage with bones, but the girl was surprised to say that he seemed to trust her. But the Beta only shouted that she had to earn her bread. The guys had no other reason to take such a monster in. He was disgusted to look at her, and that's why she was chased out of the magic tower. The next moment, the boy fell down as the masked enemy approached. He said that the show was over and accused him of saying such things to the girl. He had no right to call her trash. Riley couldn't listen to him anymore, and was about to finish him off, but the next moment, the girl stretched out her hand and shouted a pillar of fire spell. Tongues of dark flame enveloped the boy and were dispelled the next moment with a swipe of her sword. The girl screamed to stay away from Beth, and the boy was surprised that she was still on his side after what she had said. She seemed even more stupid than he had been when he was a warrior defending people in his past life. The girl screamed again for Beta to run away, but the next moment the masked guy knocked her out with a light punch and told her to rest for a while. He only had a problem with this bastard, who was now shivering on the ground. Riley told him that he was not so merciful, and that he would not get off with a broken arm. He had asked for it, and the sword was already flying at him. But at that moment, someone shouted to stop, and Riley's blow was blocked by a magic shield. In the air, on a disc of magic with runes, stood an old man in a magical robe and a staff in his hand. He asked the masked man who he was. Riley realized that he had been waiting too long. Now he was facing a person with strong mana and, in addition, streams of energy were gathering around them from all sides. This energy was different from the usual, and this was not an ordinary guard, and not even a man from the temple. The magician said that if he did not want to talk, the only way out was to use force. He activated his staff, and a huge flame burst from the top of it and raged over the man. The old man introduced himself as the Grand Master of Astroya and promised to deal with him personally. A little earlier, a young man with glasses stood in the middle of the bloody room and addressed the hooded elder. He asked him to hurry to the central square, but the man said that he could only be disturbed in case of emergency. Not paying attention to the boy, he injected a purple liquid into the hand of a man. saying that the greatest master should not be disturbed by trifles. The man added a gold coin to the already full bag. But Ferda shouted in despair that the sale of the drug would have to wait, because one of their subjects had gone missing in the central square. The old man was surprised. He thought they had all rotted away in a ditch somewhere, but here was one of them still in full force. It was really worth his attention, and he decided to warm up. The guy with the glasses added that there was another person there who could stand up to their subject. The old man now turned to the masked boy and asked him how he dared to cause disturbances on the territory of the Grand Master of Astroya. He would not get away with it. Riley responded by asking if he himself was not disgusted by his majestic title. The audience began to worry for themselves as they watched the giant fire whirlpool above the chief magician. The magician promised to personally imprison him, and the boy was happy to test his power. The next moment, the old man shouted a spell, and a giant meteor-like fireball flew at the boy. The boy decided to cut this fire into 3 pieces, and at the same time send it back to its owner. The master was furious at this impudence, and was forced to send a giant water balloon to meet him. The fire and water destroyed each other, but now there was an impenetrable vapor around the master. He couldn't believe that this dead man had not only avoided the magic attack, but had attacked with it. The master looked around to see where the enemy had gone, but the next moment a sword was flying at his back, aimed at his head. The old man barely had time to react by setting up a barrier, but it cracked and the sword passed through it, wounding him in the hand with the staff. He screamed in pain and asked how the boy dared to raise his hand against him, but the attacker was nowhere to be found. There was only a bloodied beta downstairs, and no one saw where he had gone. A procession with Saint Frisia in front was approaching the battlefield. The abbots of the church thought that a large cloud of steam that seemed to be moving toward them was dangerous. Frisia ordered everyone to stop and step forward. Raising her hand in the air, she activated the divine barrier, and a giant dome of magical energy appeared in front of them. The abbots thought that it was the magic of the Grand Master himself, but they did not understand how he could attack the saint. When the vapor dissipated, the girl noticed that he was not looking at them, but was fixated on the central square, and she said that they needed to retreat to avoid being attacked. According to the prophecy of the goddess Ironess, although she had to find him first, there were more important things to do. Meanwhile, Sarah thought that the temple servants were in a hurry, and Lady Iris said that something serious must have happened. Only Ian stood silent, but the girl had already begun to ask him why the young lord would be looking for Frisia herself. He must have known something. He didn't know what to say, and the next moment Riley appeared behind them. When he asked the old man where he was, the boy said that the old man had been missing for a long time, and that he had to go in search of him. Lady Iris said that they must have just missed each other, but Ian guessed that he had somehow learned of Saint Frisia's arrival and had hidden himself on purpose. Sarah said that since they were finally here, they could go back to their rooms. The boy and the old man walked behind them, and Riley wondered if he had solved their problem. Ian replied that they had met the saint halfway, and that he did not know what happened to the other two. Riley was glad to hear that, and he thought that he would have to visit that ragged girl in the hood sometime. He still had this stupid habit of saving the underprivileged from his previous life, so he took the girl to a safe place and returned to his own. The guardsman asked the Arenzian brothers why they had gone to Lower Salt. While the older brother was trembling, the younger one said that they had a meeting there. The man in armor asked who they were supposed to meet with, but the boy replied that they were not obliged to report such things. The guardsman did not understand why these two had come to his head, and the next moment Chervanovolosa was yelling at him. The girl demanded that the interrogation be stopped, because it was obvious that the boys had nothing to do with the incident. They were busy people, after all, and all this noise was caused by the magicians. The girl asked if the guardian really believed that the nobility of the Arenzian family, who were swordsmen, were somehow involved in magic. The next moment she was shouting that they were victims themselves, because they had been injured and even one of their escorts had died in the disaster. The man in armor stopped her outburst with his hand and asked her to calm down first. He handed her a piece of paper and asked her to send her testimony later. The girl was furious at his meticulousness, but she took the sheet and returned to the gentleman. The red-haired woman apologized for the wait and suggested that they finish their trip for the day and have dinner somewhere. The guardsman thought as he watched them go that the girl was a two-faced animal, and the owners were no different. Nini came to an unfamiliar place. The room was locked, and the last thing she remembered was the central square in Beta. She replayed all of his words in her head and decided that she had been abandoned again. As she replayed those words over and over again, they hurt her, and she started to cry. The next moment, the door opened and Riley appeared. She was crying that she just didn't want to be alone, but the boy interrupted her, and she finally noticed him. He stood over her and asked if she had finally come to, because she had been lying there for so long that he thought she was dead. The girl was only interested in what was wrong with Beth, but the boy had no idea and immediately asked what she had used to attack him. Riley said that no one he knew could do that, and he was interested in the details, but the girl turned away and said she didn't have to answer him. The boy asked her to at least tell him what kind of creature she was, because she didn't seem like a normal wizard because of her mana color. The boy missed the fact that it was probably a reaction of her body to some drugs. But the girl didn't understand why he wanted to know. Riley was tired of her wasting his time, and didn't seem to understand the circumstances she was in. He pulled out his sword and put it to her neck. The girl looked at him frightened, and could not believe that she would die like this. She remembered her childhood, when it was winter outside and snowing, and how she compared its color with the color of her hair and her mother's. How they rejoiced together, and she was the beauty of her parents. Then she was a beautiful silver-haired girl without a disfigured face. The girl took after her mother and hoped that by participating in the experiments of the Tower of Magicians, they would be able to live a carefree life. The girl arrived at the tower with an invitation in her hands and was already dreaming of becoming a great magician. But once in the dungeons of the tower, she was frightened by someone's pleas for help. Someone could not stand it any longer. She was handed a pill, saying that it was her turn. She looked at it and asked if she could take it, but was told that otherwise her family would not receive any money. It was the Grand Master himself, handing her the pill and telling her to try her best. And behind him, behind bars, other participants were suffering from pain. Some even begged to be killed. The next day, someone was still begging to kill him, but the magicians were jubilant over their success. They experimented with 4 stones of different energies, and this time, the mana did not evaporate but remained in the body. This promising result meant that they would be able to create higher-level mages. The girl asked if the experiment was finally over, and was told that she had done a good job. Her hair turned black, and half of her face turned red. The energy of one of the stones was now wrapped around her hand, which meant that she could now use magic. She was allowed to go home, and was glad that she no longer had to take those pills. The snow creaked under her feet, and she hurried to meet her family. She ran home, and the door was not opened. Even her own mother did not recognize her. The girl fell to her knees and screamed that it was her girl with snow-white hair, Nini. Sobbing, she asked Riley what she had done wrong, what was her fault. The girl's tears fell on the sword around her neck, and she said that she had done everything she could to not disappoint anyone. The girl asked why she had become so unhappy and unwanted in the end. The boy put the sword away and said that she could not have been happy that way. She had made a mistake in the way she was living, and should have lived differently from the beginning. Riley said he had made the same mistake and asked if she would like his help. She was surprised to hear that he really offered her help. She wanted to know how she could start over with a face and body like that, and under such circumstances. The guy said he didn't want to help her for nothing and offered her a deal. Her life was ruined by vain expectations and hopes for other people. And now she is looking for someone to rely on again. He promised to help her start from scratch and extended his hand to her. The girl did not understand why he was helping her, why an aristocrat would lend a helping hand to someone like her. Riley replied that there was no particular reason. When he looked at her, he saw himself in the past. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the tower, the magistrate was sitting, his arm already bandaged, chewing on healing herbs. His subordinates reported that they could not find the guy in the mask, and asked him to forgive them. The magistrate stood up and spat out a potion, and asked if they had at least found the other criminal, the bastard who had split the magic stone. But the guy with the glasses said that although they had several suspects, they had no direct evidence. The next moment, the old man grabbed the other boy by the throat, and his hand burst into flames. He furiously shouted at them to stop making excuses and tell it like it is, otherwise he would burn them alive right now. The master slapped his subordinates and ordered them to finally get their act together. They were so stupid that they not only let the masked man in, but also failed to find the one who had split the stone. And as if that wasn't enough, they also let in the girl from the experiment, who was raging in the square. The master asked how this could have happened, and if the masked boy was really hard to catch and there was no evidence of who broke the stone, then they had to find the girl thanks to the seal. The boy, who was already lying on the floor, said that the seal was gone, and the master did not understand what he was saying, but he insisted that it had been erased. The boy begged to believe him, and the master could check it himself. Now the elder was interested in hearing from the Arinziums, and the boy reported that because of what had happened, they had not come to the meeting. The master said that he was sorry to hear that, because it was the last chance to pick up the goods, and it looked like they could not expect good marks in the fencing tournament. The old man asked the boy with the glasses what about those two types from Niznaya Salia, whether he had them under control. When he received an affirmative answer, he said that at least they were capable of that, but he didn't want to see his stupid subordinates anymore. As the master was about to leave, Ferda asked if he was going to the basement again and asked him to stop. He asked if it was not enough to invent a cure to reach the seventh circle of magic. It no longer looked like a passion for science. But the master did not listen to him, and simply teleported away. Meanwhile, the girl was asking Riley how exactly she reminded him of himself, and it didn't seem like he had been experimented on either. The boy didn't listen, he just sniffed the boxes next to them. The girl didn't understand what he was doing, and he opened a box and said that he smelled something. Taking a handful of leaves from the drawer, he asked why there was a drug warehouse in the Tower of Mages. But the next moment a blue flash illuminated them, and the master appeared behind them. He was surprised to see the girl, and she was afraid of him and began to tremble. The man was glad to see her unexpected gift, because it was harder to find her now, and he wondered how she had erased the seal. Meanwhile, Riley put on his mask and asked the elder behind the boxes if it was he who had boasted of his title as Grand Master Astrologer. The master was surprised to hear who else was there, and the boy came out and introduced himself as an old friend in a mask. Holding the leaves in his hands, the boy said that it seemed to be not so boring in the magic tower, and asked him if it was all his good. The masked guy reminded him that such things are forbidden by law in Solia, and that although he only wanted to find something related to this girl standing in front of him, he seemed to have caught a big fish. He laughed that if people found out about this warehouse, they would turn the tower upside down. The master was filled with rage and launched a fireball in their direction. The girl screamed in horror, but the next moment Riley was already in front of her and deflected the ball with his sword. He asked the old man how he could call himself a Grand Master if he threw this girl into the street. The master was furious and asked who the hell he was, but the boy said he was just a retired warrior who was passing by. The old man called the two of them miserable garbage and shouted how dare they behave like that. He was about to launch another fireball, but the sword was faster and cut off his arm right at the shoulder. The magistrate looked at his severed limb in horror and, gritting his teeth, fell to his knees, holding the wound with his other hand. The old man was screaming about his arm. He could not believe how someone could do this to him. The boy just said that if he wanted his arm so badly, he could take it back and put it back. The magistrate shouted what kind of nonsense he was talking about, and the boy replied that he had cut one of his major arteries, and at this rate he would die here like a dog. Riley stuck his hand out to his owner and said that he would not bother him, let him take it and teleport away. Because he still had to continue his search, he asked the girl if they were close. The old man looked at him in surprise and did not understand what he was talking about. But the masked boy was striking the stone floor with the point of his sword and was sure that the entrance to the basement was somewhere nearby. A second later, the sword broke the stone floor, and the old man shouted in surprise. The boy was sure that he had found the place where they performed experiments on people. The magician yelled at the girl that she had betrayed them. They had given her everything and taught her magic, and in return, they had received a knife in the back. Shrouded in dark energy, the fragments of the floor began to fly around the room. The boy asked what exactly he meant by training, and the girl added that she was taught not by the old man, but by Ferda's teacher. She said that his words meant nothing to her now, and that she had met a person who would really help her. She concentrated dark energy in her left hand and shouted that she wanted to start her life from scratch and, building up more and more energy, demanded that the old man not get in their way. The old man just shouted that they would meet again and teleported away. The boy was surprised at his long tongue. The old man had just had his arm cut off, and he still couldn't speak. The magician almost bled to death here, but since he is a wizard, he will somehow survive. The girl sat down on the floor and said that the boy was the same, as if he could have just killed him, but for some reason he cut off only his arm. Picking up his sword from the floor, Riley replied that he needed the whole picture. They walked down the stairs, and the girl asked him what he meant. The boy said that he just wanted to live a peaceful life, and then something extraordinary happened. He asked what she would do in his place, because in such cases he chooses to take a step back and stay away from everything. And even if the devil himself came out of hell, and the world went up in flames, he was interested in personally lighting the wick and enjoying it before the explosion. The boy turned to her and said with a smile that it had to be done unnoticed. And now they would do something similar. Riley opened the door and went first. The girl did not understand what was wrong with this guy's head but followed him. They got into a room with cabinets and a table with scales and different vials. The guy wanted to find the drugs they used in that experiment, but the girl didn't know what they gave her. Riley wondered how she found it in that square, because it didn't look like magic. The girl said that it really wasn't magic and pointed to her eye. She said that she just had to imagine the clothes or what the right person looked like, and then she could easily find them. The guy said it was like a radar, but the girl didn't understand what he meant, and he again said he was talking to himself. Riley asked if she had learned black magic and target detection skills here, and the girl nodded sadly. There were still other participants behind bars, begging for help. The guy said that now they needed to add fuel to the fire and smash the locks of the cell. He was now personally setting the wick on fire. It was time to step back and watch. He threw the girl a gold coin with a coat of arms and said that she would be free. The girl was surprised not to understand what he was talking about, not even trying to catch it. The next day, 2 participants were already standing in the arena, and the judge was explaining the rules to them. Lady Iris woke the boy up and told him that the fight was about to start. He had fallen asleep right on the stand after a long night. The woman said that this was something you don't see every day, so he shouldn't miss the show. Ian asked if one of them was from the Arenzium family, and he heard that he had already performed yesterday. Sarah enthusiastically said that it was true. This boy had defeated his opponent with 2 swords in seconds, whom she had been rooting for. She was still upset that the fight ended so quickly. Riley asked the girl if she had noticed anything when the younger Arenzium was fighting. The girl didn't understand what he was asking, but he clarified that she smelled something. The fight was about to start, and the judge was counting down to 3 seconds. It seemed to Sarah that he had really changed and smelled completely different. A second after the start of the fight, the boy screamed and dropped his sword, falling to the ground. Aplok was pounding the table in anger, shouting that if they hadn't been hit by that blow yesterday and hadn't been caught, this wouldn't have happened. The red-haired woman calmed him down, but when his brother lost, he could not be calm. He was sitting on the floor next to her, with his head in his knees. The girl reported that she had gone to Nizhny Solia this morning, and their man would no longer be able to supply them with goods. This made the gentleman even more angry. It turned out that these worms from that hole had betrayed them. The redhead said she tried to blackmail them, but they didn't fall for it. The man shouted as they could to say no to the noble lord. He also remembered Riley whispering haughtily to him to stop using dirty tricks, and the man was now screaming at the injustice, clutching his head. The man had a feeling that there were thousands of ants under his skin, and if he didn't take that drug, he wouldn't be able to take it anymore. He grabbed his sword and thought that he would take the goods himself if they were not given to him voluntarily. As a swordsman from the Arenzium family, he could certainly handle a couple of worms from that hole. He stood up and started for the door, the girl trying to stop him, because his brother needed support, but he wasn't listening. The fencing tournament was over and Sarah said that it would be good to visit some more local sites, as they would have to return home tomorrow. Lady Iris agreed. She was even sorry to have to return so soon. The boy walked behind them with his hands behind his head and thought about Nina. He wondered if she had reached the temple yet, and he told her to go there right after the tournament. She was to set fire to the wick and tell him what had happened, because she hated the man who had ruined her life. Nina thought that no one would listen to her, because even her own mother disowned her and did not even want to see her. But the other test subjects, who were released by the boy, unanimously supported her. They had the same disfigured faces, and had all gone through the same thing, so now she was not alone. The boy said that in order to succeed, they would need to throw a bait, but in a way that they could not turn a blind eye. Nini held the drug potion from the boxes in her hand, and believed that she could do it, and the others also believed that no one should go through the same thing and suffer like they did. They had to grab this chance and succeed so that they could start their lives from scratch. When they reached the threshold of the temple, as expected, they were immediately stopped, looked terrible, and as residents of Lower Solia, they were asked to leave the temple. But Nini could not simply retreat and move forward, even though the temple knights were already drawing their swords. The girl shouted to be heard. She was the only one from Lower Solia, and the others were from the left and right, and they were only some of the survivors. Nini held out her green leaves and shouted that she had to tell them about the inhuman experiments on people in the Tower of Mages, and to report their dirty deeds. The rector of the temple stared at the potion in surprise, and a voice behind him asked the girl's name, and he immediately moved away. Saint Frisia came out to them, introduced herself to Nini, and was surprised that she recognized her. The next moment, Saint Frisia was asking the church's superiors about the number of people available at the moment. Aplok was walking down the street and frightening passers-by with his appearance. His face was veined with rage and bruises were visible under his eyes. Sweat was pouring down his forehead, and he was kneading his shoulder, wounded in the battle with Riley. He shouted that these bastards had no right to do this to the nobility of the Arenzium family. The man promised to kill them all. But a figure in a magical cloak appeared behind him. The master said he was looking for him. At first Aplok looked at him in surprise, and then shouted that it was he who had ordered his men not to give him the goods. He had already shouted to the whole street about the herb, but immediately received a slap on the wrist from the elder, and a request to shut up. The master asked if Aplok really thought he would get away with it, and the man looked at the old man in surprise, and did not understand what he was talking about. Then the elder took out a potion, and said that he had given the man everything he asked for, but he had decided to betray him. The smell of the leaves made Aplok even more dizzy, and his mouth watered. The wizard waved the potion, and asked if this was what he wanted, running around in a mask like a vile rat. Aplok was out of it, and just nodded his head. Astroya pulled out a gold coin and told him to look at what he had found, showing him the Arinzium family crest on it. It was the same coin that Riley had given the girl earlier. Aplok began to examine his suit and did not understand why the old man had his family badge. But Astroya demanded that he stop playing comedy, and the next moment he burned the potion in his hand with magic fire. Aplok threw himself to the ground for its burnt remains and begged him not to do so. The master thought about the whole situation for a second, and it seemed to him that something was wrong. This bastard seemed too weak. The next moment, his thoughts were interrupted by Saint Frisia, accompanied by the abbots and armed guards, his face frozen with surprise. She told him that she had received information about his criminal actions and demanded that he answer a few questions. He turned around and asked with a smile what Saint Frisia was doing here, but the girl interrupted him, telling him about human experiments and the production of drugs and their illegal sale. She asked him what he had to say in his defense, but the master had already activated the portal's magic and suggested that they talk later. But the next moment, someone shouted out to cancel the spell, and the teleport magic was dispersed by dark energy. Astroya looked at his hand in surprise, and wondered how Frisia could have done that without being a 7th level mage with a body like that. The next moment, Nini came forward, dressed as a temple servant, asking where the rascal was going, and her hand was enveloped in the same dark energy. Frisia asked if he knew this girl and wanted to know if the Grand Master really did all this. Sarah caught this scene and thought that there was some big showdown going on. Ian told the young master that it was really serious. Riley was glad that Nini had done it. She even managed to get Saint Frisia herself here, and he could only enjoy the action. The master clumsily objected. There was nothing like that in their tower. They didn't use such substances even for medicinal purposes. Frisia asked again. She wanted to know if the old man could swear in the name of the goddess Ironess, and looked up at him. The girl's yellow eyes glowed with energy, and she burned the old man, who was hiding his eyes, with her gaze. Riley, at the sight of this picture, was not happy with this walking lie detector. No wonder he did not want to get involved with these saints. Astroya just looked at everyone angrily, and Frisia repeated her question again. He laughed, and the next moment said that it was indeed him. In the basement of the tower, he was indeed making drugs and selling them to aristocrats, but the money only paid for his modest magical experiments. Frisia wanted to say something, but the old man asked her haughtily what the problem was. Nini could not stand it, saying that he was lying about his modest experiments, her fists clenched with rage. She burst out screaming about this asshole, but the next moment, there was an even louder scream with loud cursing behind her. The girl turned around in surprise, and there was Ian, burning with anger and screaming about making drugs. Sarah grabbed him and tried to calm him down, but the old man was screaming that the Great War started because of these damn drugs. He shouted that so much blood and tears had been shed in that war, and how dare he do such a thing. Even Frisia looked at him in surprise, but Ian was clenching his fist and shouting that he had always disliked these magical bastards, especially the likes of him. Frisia tried to get the conversation back on track and asked the master in an official tone about his crimes, listing them. She demanded that he come with them straight to the Ministry of Salt. 2 heavily armed lancers stepped out in front of her, their helmets slit in the shape of a cross, and their armor zinging with every step. Astroya laughed, powerful magical currents hovering around him. He didn't understand how they were going to arrest him and throw him in a dungeon for no reason. Did they forget about his 7th level of magic? He asked if maybe they shouldn't become enemies with the saint. The girl replied that they really shouldn't, and the master, reducing the flow of mana, pointed out his mistake next to her and promised to deal with the monster himself. Nini could not bear to hear such words, but Saint Frisia continued for her. The girl told him about the blessing of God that had recently descended on her. She had received a revelation. Astroya asked her what she was talking about. But Saint said that the one who had saved them all had already arrived in this world. At that moment, Riley forgot how to breathe. A magic circle appeared behind the girl, and she ordered the arrest of the master, pointing her hand at him. Astroya activated his magic circle with runes and shouted that it was self-defense. He called down the sands of grease under the guards' feet, and then the mud, causing them to fall and sink. The guards were unable to move, and green blobs of energy hovered around them. The magistrate shouted that Saint Frisia could still take back her words, otherwise many people would suffer. But the girl dispelled his spell from the Laniki, and told them to start evacuating people. They wanted to object, but Frisia said that if they didn't stop him right now, more people would die later. The Latniks moved to accept the order, and Astroya was already forming a whirlpool of fire above him. He shouted that they were all going to hell, but let them blame their saint. The old man called for the meteorite, and it flew at the girl from above. Frisia responded by saying the sanctuary spell, and a beam of yellow light shot from her hand to meet the fire, which scattered the flames, and only its small tongues burned her fingers. The astrologer noted her skill, but the next moment his circle of runes increased significantly, and hundreds of magical arrows flew from him. He was going to fight to the death. The abbots of the temple informed Frisia that reinforcements had already been summoned, and she only had to hold out until they arrived. The girl raised both hands to the sky and activated a barrier, the yellow light of which shielded her from arrows, but she would not be able to hold out for long. Frisia asked Nini to help, because the barrier was already cracking. Nini shouted a reversal of the spell, and the arrows that had already penetrated the dome began to dissipate, but one still wounded the saint, sliding across her cheek. Ian cried out at her injury, but she said she was fine and told him to hold on until reinforcements arrived. The next moment, Greybeard stood in front of Frisia with his sword at the ready, and he cut all the arrows in front of the girl, who recognized him as the man from the competition. Astroya was surprised by the simple sword and even smiled at it. Riley, meanwhile, was sighing because his old man couldn't resist getting into a fight. Sarah begged the young lord to leave, but he asked her to take care of his mother first, and he would watch the action a little longer. The magician levitated in the air on his magic circle, and was amused that he had gotten 2 weaklings out of the whole city. He said that the games were over, and now they would play like adults. Frisia shouted back at him that he wouldn't get off with a simple arrest now. But Astroya asked with a smile if he would be innocent if all the witnesses died. Streams of dark magic immediately flared up above him, covering even the sun. Nini watched in horror as the hell spell was activated. It could not be undone, but to start life from scratch, the old man had to die at any cost. The girl's legs did not obey her. She froze, but a voice addressed her with a question that knew what she was thinking. Riley had warned her that she would only die in vain. Does she really want such a stupid end for herself and him, while still wanting to start a new life? The girl did not understand whose voice it was, and the boy put on a mask and finally moved forward. Jen asked what kind of hell he was talking about, and the Latniks did not know what to do now. Frisia could not even imagine that the master had such power. She asked why he was doing this, but he only said to give his regards to the goddess Ironess, expanding the dark magic circle that had already completely covered the sun. Tongues of dark flame began to fly down. Nini shouted to everyone to save themselves, and she ran to hold back the flow of fire, raising her hands to meet it and counteracting her streams of magic. She promised to try to stop the madman. The girl told herself she could do it. Tears were coming out of her eyes, and maybe this was the moment she was living for. Even though this moment disappointingly deprived her of hope for a new life, thanks to the person who helped her, she still believed. The girl smilingly gave her last strength in an unequal confrontation, blood and tears pouring from her eyes. She said that even if she died now, she would not regret it. Footsteps were heard behind her, and a voice asked what she was grinding. The next moment, a guy in a mask and a cloak was already flying in a jump ahead of her. He was shouting that he had made so much effort to save her, to give her a new life, and she was going to ruin it all by dying so stupidly. Only one sword strike surprised everyone. It broke the spell, and the master recognized the culprit. It was the bastard who had dared to do this to him in that basement. But Riley was now pissing off Sir for being too slow, because when people want to escape, they move faster than that. He turned his head to his Stroy, and his sword glowed with blue energy. The boy said that he was pissing him off even more. The masked guy mockingly asked the saint where her divine power was, which was not enough even to stop it. She listened to him in amazement, falling to the ground from Astroy's magic. Riley waved his sword like a fan with one hand, dispelling the remnants of hell, and with the other he lifted Furzia to her feet by the collar. The guy said that the spell was over, and she should gather her followers and get out of here. The girl and the knights obediently took cover and tried to understand what had happened. She healed herself and her followers. Meanwhile, Nini asked the boy why he was here, because he had promised not to interfere and to stay one step behind. He said with a sigh that he hadn't intended to, but it almost happened right in front of him. Astroya angrily asked how the boy had broken his spell, and even with barely a swing of his sword. Riley said that the girl had been messing with him for a long time. The master was now shouting that he was a 7th-level wizard, and that the boy had just said something untrue about him. The masked boy mumbled in a lazy voice that it had taken him a while to resolve the situation, and his mother had almost been hurt, so he decided to take care of it himself. His words irritated the Grand Master even more, and the girl wondered who he was, although she knew he was no ordinary person, but it was too much to just break the spell of the master himself. The boy put his hand on her shoulder and asked her to leave her thoughts for later, because they had to finish the job. He called for help from the old man, who was cutting the arrows with his sword. The boy took hold of the girl's hand, guiding her and telling her to take a deep breath. She asked what he was up to, but he told her to be quiet and that it was time to finish the job. The boy ordered the old man to shoot as many arrows as he could, and he was already standing with his bow ready. Astroya asked if he was still going to go after him, and added that he didn't care, he was going to tear him to shreds anyway. The masked guy said no, that he should try if he could. Astroya activated a wall of fire around the enemies, cutting off the path to retreat. The boy said that he would handle the spell himself, and ordered the old man with a bow to continue to hold back the enemy. His arrow had already wounded the magician's face, and he was activating the spell of poisonous fog. A green circle appeared above the trio, and the magical clots began to descend, but they met a yellow barrier. It was Saint Frisia who decided to contribute and help. The boy asked why she got up. She could have continued to rest. The girl said angrily that people in such cases just say thank you. The master shouted that he had no time for cockroaches like them, and activated the cold magic. He now had about half of his mana left, but he thought it should be enough. He angrily shouted the blizzard spell, and 4 magic circles appeared behind him at once, and snow fell from them. The boy said that for an old man, his eyes were too fierce, and he hadn't fought a real fight in a long time. Riley asked Nini to hit him with one strong charge, and told him to aim right at his heart. They would hit at the same time. He told the old man to protect them from the ice icicles. Giant icicles appeared from the master's magic circles, which frightened the girl, who was collecting dark energy in her hand. Riley calmed her down and told her to concentrate only on the strike, and that their archer would take care of the rest, as he was already pulling the string. The masked guy mockingly said that in case of failure, they had the almighty saint. She asked how long she could take it, and showed her fist. The next moment, dozens of ice shells flew from the sky, but the old man used the spell hail of arrows, and his bow fired a dozen shots at once. The arrows shattered the icicles in the air, and their rather large fragments continued to fall on the people. Then Furzia activated the barrier, and was able to cover everyone, while Nini was about to finish accumulating energy for a powerful blow. The girl shouted for her partners to pay attention to the ground, which began to freeze under their feet. And the next moment, sharp spikes of ice were growing right in front of the saint, and she began to scream as they grew closer and closer to her, and she failed to hold the barrier. A boy stood on top of the ice and said that they were putting on a circus here, holding Frisia, who was surprised to be alive. A gust of wind tore off his hood and mask, and he was asking the girl if she was okay. She looked up and shouted in surprise that it was him who had been in the temple the previous time. Riley put his hood back on and asked Nina if she was ready to strike. Frisia wondered if it was him that the goddess Ironess had met in the temple. Riley ordered the dark-haired girl to attack on his command and rushed forward himself. The girl was about to use her last remaining mana, but she realized that they had only survived to this point because of their joint efforts. Even if she failed to kill the master, she still had nothing to regret. Behind Astroya, the ice rings of magic changed to fire, and the elder's eyes were also burning with anger. Riley gave the command to attack, and Nini released a charge of dark magic toward the enemy, but her body felt like it was about to explode, bleeding again. Astroya laughed at her feeble attempt and blocked the flow of dark energy with his flame. Just as she thought, her strength was not enough, although she gave it her best shot, and still regretted a little that she failed. Riley sent his sword flying with the help of magic. Air currents formed around it, and he hoped it would work now. Astroya's face froze in surprise, and before he could realize anything, a giant hole appeared in his chest. He did not understand what had happened, and the next moment, the girl's dark energy exploded right in front of him. The remnants of the magical streams and snow fell to the ground, as did the exhausted Nini. Astroya's bloodied body fell against the wall nearby. Frisia and Ian ran to Nini, and Sviataya shouted that the girl could not die like that. She sobbed and begged the girl to open her eyes, and her tears fell on the smiling face of the unconscious Nini. In the evening, Nini was already in the church, and Frisia was sitting by her bedside, recalling the events. She tried to understand where the boy had disappeared and asked the old man. But he only saw the fall of the master, and did not know where he was. Frisia herself was far away at the time, and did not even notice his disappearance. She said that the guy in the mask had appeared again, just as unnoticed, and disappeared. Jen picked Nini up and added that without his help they would not have defeated the master. Frisia asked the old man if he was serving the Iplet family, because they had met at the tournament, and he said that he was. The saint's memories were interrupted by Nini, who had just woken up and didn't realize where she was. Frisia was happy that the girl had finally come to her senses. She apologized to the girl. She did her best, but her body condition was much worse than expected. The magic that had been in her since that experiment in the basement of the tower had greatly changed her body and significantly reduced her life expectancy. Too much time had passed, and she could not fix it. Frisia was amazed at the girl's courage, who gathered all her courage into a fist and was able to tell about Astro's dark deeds. But at the same time, she was upset that she could not do anything for her. Nini said that everything was fine. She was ready for it. Frisia did not know how to thank her and how to ask for forgiveness, because thanks to her, they managed to stop the master. Nini said that she hadn't really done much and asked how long she had left. Tears came to Frisia's eyes, and they could only extend her life a little bit. At worst, she had until the end of the summer, and maybe she would last through the winter, but she should expect no later than the end of the fall. Nini thought that she had quite a bit of time until the fall, and that it would be enough for her. She thought she was too focused on revenge. Nini thanked Frisia for everything, but she said that she could not even look the girl in the eye because she could not do anything about her illness. The dark-haired woman asked her to agree that she had not officially accomplished any heroic deeds, neither that she had uncovered the master's dark deeds nor that she had killed him. Frisia was surprised, but the girl continued to say that it was not her who did it, but the masked boy. It was he who should receive all the glory and honor for the deed, so let her fulfill his wish. Frisia asked her in surprise if she knew who he was, and the girl nodded in response. Fireworks were thundering in the sky above the castle, and the tournament was still going on below. Two cloaked boys were fighting in the arena, their swords never ceasing to echo with the sound of battle. Riley, with something in his mouth again, asked Sarah if she had seen the outrage. Sarah said that she saw what she saw. The boy asked what she didn't like, and she said that it was the legs. Riley shouted that she finally understood. They don't use their legs at all, they just wave their arms. It was annoying him. Lady Iris was happy to see her son so enthusiastic, but Ian, who was sitting next to her, said nothing. The woman asked him if he was okay, and the old man said that his body was not the same anymore, but Iris noticed that she could not do anything at all, and he was glad that she was not hurt. The fight was over, and the participants bowed to each other. Sarah asked the young gentleman when he returned and was glad that he was not hurt. He said he had left almost immediately after them, so nothing could have happened to him. The tournament was declared over, and it was announced that the main award would be presented by the Prince of Salt himself. A blond boy came up to the podium, said hello, introduced himself as Daniel, and had something to say before the award ceremony. Daniel spoke about the exposure of the events in the Mage Tower, and said that they were uncovered by a member of the aristocratic family. At this point, Riley's lazy expression changed to a wary one. The prince continued, saying that this person was right among them today as a spectator. Lady Iris asked with interest who it was. Daniel proclaimed that it was a man from the Iplet family, and Riley's face twisted in surprise. Ian, Sarah, and Lady Iris also froze in amazement. The prince knew that this man was present at the tournament today, and asked for a sign from his seat. Jan could not make out a word, and Sarah asked the young man if he had heard what the prince had said. But when she turned her head, she found only her master's burger and coke falling. Riley hid in the bathroom and clutched his head, wondering how they knew. Right now, the prince was praising the hero of Iplet's family before he showed up. The boy heard his statements all the way there, and did not understand anything because he wore a mask and changed his voice. He had even calculated the exact strength to make his sword melt from Nina's magic. But the next moment, his thoughts were interrupted by someone's footsteps, and two pairs of legs could be seen in the lumen of the booth. One of the voices asked if he was really there, and the other simply offered to open the door. The next moment, the door was opened with the help of Nini's magic, and Riley was lazily staring at the uninvited guests from the booth. Saint Frisia looked at the boy through her fingers, expecting to see more, and he promised to sue the girls for harassment. He asked how they had found him in the first place, and the dark-haired one pointed to her special eye. The boy immediately remembered their conversation in the basement, and that it wasn't magic. He shouted that it wasn't fair to use radar, and slammed his fist angrily against the booth. And this saint allows herself to hang around men's toilets. It seemed that there were fewer saints in this world. Frisia yelled back, she wasn't his type, as he said. Riley stood up, hitting his forehead and asking what they wanted from him. Frisia stumbled a little, and said it was a little awkward to talk about this in the men's room. But the next moment, she was happy to say that he was blessed by the goddess Irene. She wanted to continue, but the boy reflected on his past life, and that he would not buy it anymore, and told her to stop. Riley asked if there was going to be a part about the great evil that he had to destroy. Frisia asked him how he knew, and his head was racing with the thought that it was happening again. They were going to make him a warrior again to fight some evil. The saint said that he had received his power through the dragon, which would soon appear, and the end would come not only for Solia, but for the whole world. The boy asked what to do now, and she said that the chosen one would catch him and stared at him. He wondered why her omnipotent goddess, with so many planets in the universe, had picked on this stupid Earth. On top of that, she's trying to force me to save a dozen shitty towns. Riley asked the girls if they knew about his nickname, Lazy Sword. He was going to live his life lazily, enjoying himself, not having to do anything, so why are they asking him to go fight some dragon? Besides, the last time they met, she called him gay. Nini asked in surprise, but Frisia bellowed that she didn't need to know. The boy was not going to cooperate with her, and turned to leave. The girl demanded to stay where she was and remembered Astro. He was the one who stopped her. Riley turned around and asked her where she got that from. The girl said that she had heard how he had discovered the drug production, and it was he who had stopped those experiments on humans in the Mage Tower. The boy grabbed his head and asked who could have told her such nonsense, and the next moment he met Nini's eyes. He shouted at her, telling her to keep her mouth shut, and rushed toward her. Frisia tried to block the girl, but the boy ordered her to get out of the way. Riley grabbed Nina's shoulder and asked if she knew that she had betrayed him. Frisia told him not to worry, Nini had told only her. The boy did not understand what the prince was talking about, and she said that no one knows about his power. They only know that he made a great contribution to solving the case, and Nini herself was against even that until the end. Frisia said that his power was incredibly strong anyway, and the boy asked what was the point. The girl asked him to catch the dragon, as it was said in the prediction, and he dryly replied that he did not want to. He asked to leave him alone and give him a break from it. Riley looked at Nini and asked him to come out to talk to him. Meanwhile, at the Ippolat estate, the Count was reading a newspaper. The article talked about the exposure of drug production and sales in the Mage Tower. A huge warehouse with illegal hallucinogenic herbs was found. It turned out that the master astrologer himself was behind everything, and a young boy from a family of aristocrats helped to reveal the terrible truth. Prince Daniel presented the medal to Count Ippolat's third son. The surprise on the Count's face turned into a strange smile of pride. The four walked down the street with Nini, and Jan cried with happiness. The mother asked her son where he had gone, but he said that he had just run to the toilet. The old man was proud that Saint Frisia had found out the truth only because of the young man, and could not hold back his tears of happiness. Passers-by looked at the boy and wondered if he was the same gentleman from the Ippolat family. If it was the youngest son, he looked nothing like they had been saying. That is why the boy did not want to attract attention and stay in the shadows. As soon as he waved his sword a couple of times, everyone started to admire him and give him a hard time. Lady Iris said that her father must have already found out and was going crazy with happiness. The woman asked him who the girl next to him was, but he had a hard time answering right away. The boy said that he had picked her up in the restroom. Sarah whispered to her mother that the girl seemed to be blind in one eye, and she thought so too. Riley continued to tell how he had seen her use magic and just admired her. After he measured the mana level in the tower, he wanted to practice magic too. So he thought to hire her as a maid, since she was trained in magic and would not be superfluous. Jan was surprised by his words and wanted to continue, but the boy said that he knew about her participation in the experiment and understood her situation. So he couldn't just leave her like that. His mother didn't mind at all. Besides, it was probably his first independent decision, and she respected her son's choice. Riley nudged the dark-haired woman and asked her to introduce herself, saying that these people served his family. As soon as she said her name, Sarah approached her. The maid kept her arms crossed over her chest and looked at her carefully, immediately realizing from her appearance and mannerisms that she was from Lower Solia. The maid had been there and knew what she was talking about, and now Sarah promised to take care of her properly. When Riley called Nina to come with him, he said he was going to take her to Ippolita County, because it was not clear what else she would say here and to whom. It was better for him to keep her close to him, and at the same time, he would get rid of her partner, so he would be calmer. Frisia tried to object, but the guy said that they wouldn't have had to take her if she hadn't been so vocal. Nini didn't mind, but he still hadn't answered her question about how to start life from scratch. Sarah was now suggesting that they return to the county, but his father had said in a letter that he wanted to see them as soon as possible. Ian realized that he had read the newspaper. The tournament was over, and they really needed to get back. Nighty asked him if she could call him sir now, but she was grateful because she never imagined that she would ever be able to leave this horrible place. He thought it was funny, because if anyone heard, they would think he was saving her from something. The Bishop of Ravosa, who had once helped Lady Iris, appeared before them. She asked him why he was here, and he said he was looking for someone and had something to give them. The temple officials handed Nina and Riley boxes, and Ravosa said they were trophies. Inside were the master's robe and other things. After he was defeated, these things belonged to them. The staff was broken, so they were given only these things. Nighty wondered if they had to take it. Her face was disgusted. She hated the old man, and did not really want to touch his things. But the bishop asked them to accept the things, because they were the only ones to whom the church could give them in this case. He promised that these things were completely safe, and Saint Furzia was standing behind him. The boy looked at her, and wondered if the bishop really had the right idea. Nighty asked Riley if they would accept it. He asked what she thought about these things, and she said that there was really no magic left in them, which disappointed the boy. Riley thanked the bishop and said that if they give it to you, you must take it. Lady Iris was hurrying up their conversation, because it was time for them to go home. Ravosa said that she must be proud of her son, who had received a medal and solved a serious case. Lady Iris replied in the affirmative, and thanked him for taking care of everything personally, and promised to visit him again someday. Later, in the temple, Ravosa noticed that this guy was really different, and asked what the revelation said. He was somehow skeptical about his mission to stop evil, but said that life would show and left. Frisia looked at him suspiciously, and thought he was up to something. In fact, she received 3 revelations. In a vision, she appeared before the goddess Irene, her dark figure in a light dress and masked face illuminated by the rays of the sun. She told Frisia that she was about to face her first test, and that she should be careful about who would lead her to it. The second revelation was that she had to beware of a dragon that would arrive on Earth. And the third was that the hero was destined to stop him. The girl thought that the first test was related to Ravosa, and that perhaps the young man would somehow destroy his plans. That is why she did not tell him about the first part of the vision. But her thoughts were interrupted by one of the temple ministers, who told her to hurry. Meanwhile, late in the afternoon, the 5 had already returned to the mansion and were met by the Count. Riley, expecting to avoid him somehow, was surprised that he was still awake. The father asked where the medal was, and when his son held it out, the radiance blinded the man, and it was handed over by the prince himself, judging by the coat of arms. Lady Iris was amused by his reaction, and said that he was really worried about his son, and had always been less than completely honest with people. The man asked if it was difficult for them with only 2 assistants, but the woman said that they had done a great job. Sarah and Jan bowed and informed the owner of their return. Nighty looked at them in confusion and repeated after them. The man looked at her and asked her who the child was, and Riley froze behind him. The mother defused the situation and said that they had a lot to talk about, but it was time to go inside, so she sent Riley and Nighty ahead. Lloyd came out to them and asked about the trip. He had heard that his younger brother had won a medal and would like to see it. Riley had just thought that everything had ended well, and he would finally have a good rest. The boy looked at his red-haired brother with disbelief, and the latter mocked him, saying that his medal was a fiction. Lloyd asked what had happened to their righteous man, who never lies, and demanded to see it. Riley put on a calm expression and handed over the medal. Lloyd marveled at its radiance, and now knew what Solia's medals looked like. He wondered if it was a fake, because he couldn't figure out how he had gotten it. The red-haired man laughed and couldn't believe that he had been awarded one. Riley offered to keep it if he liked it so much. Lloyd was surprised by this offer, and his brother said that he didn't need it anyway and it only got on his nerves. So he decided to offer to keep it to the real heir to the family, making fun of him. Lloyd was angry at first, but the shine of the medal beckoned him more. he was already happily asking if he would really give it to him. At that moment, Riley snatched it away, saying that if he didn't want it, he didn't have to. Lloyd could not stand it, and grabbed his brother by the collar, shouting how dared he mock him. But his father was already behind him, and he ordered him to stop the show, so he backed off. Lady Iris asked Lloyd and the servants how they were doing, and they asked about the journey in return. The woman thanked them for their prayers, and said they had arrived without incident. She looked back to her son and whispered to him to walk faster. The girl looked back with contempt at the red-haired brat, who was now chirping so hypocritically. Iris continued to tell him about the good time they had, and he continued to smile kindly and be happy for them. Lloyd said that fun was fun, but training shouldn't be missed, and he and his older brother needed to think about their future, even though some people didn't care about it at all. Sarah and Jan could not stand such words, but had to keep silent. The red-haired man even felt sorry for his younger brother, because he didn't want him to ask for help when he got into trouble. He kept wondering what kind of metal, and how exactly he managed to get it. But now Nini could not stand it any longer. She slipped a pebble under his foot with the help of magic, and he was so busy talking that he did not notice it. The next moment, his face met the ground to her amusement. The older brothers were sitting together in the living room, and now Lloyd had a huge band-aid across his forehead, and Lion was surprised at his clumsiness. But he assured him that something strange had happened there, and his brother, stopping his hysteria, said that he understood. But the next moment, Lion was already mocking him, saying that even 10-year-olds don't fall like that, although needless to say, that's exactly what he did at that age. The older man closed the topic and asked what was going on with Riley, but his brother didn't notice anything new, only that he had brought some girl with him. Lloyd was disgusted by her, and judging by her appearance, the girl did not belong to the aristocracy and smelled different. Lion said that people from different places come to Solia, but he should keep an eye on the girl. His older brother had never noticed his interest in girls, and thought he was up to something, so he was going to find out something about her. Lion was left alone, but he kept thinking about that medal, and how he could get it just by watching from the stands. He believed that Riley was up to something, and he had to stop him from doing it. The next morning, Nini was already wearing her usual maid's dress. Sarah told the girl that it was better for her, but even if she was chosen to learn magic, she still had duties to the young master and had to fulfill them. The maid asked if the girl remembered her promise to take care of her upon arrival, and ordered her to forget everything she had learned in Nizhny Solia. The rules of the estate were strict, and they would work together. Nini thought she was scarier than Beth, especially with that sly smile she used to say it all. Riley asked the old man why the two were in his room, and he told him that Sarah hadn't had a chance to bully a newcomer in a long time. Ian asked what they were going to do with Astro's stuff, and the guy didn't know how to use it at all and suggested they just sell it all. He looked at the master's cloak and promised to think about it, and Ian said he would try to find out from the experts. Sarah was teaching the dark-haired girl how to do household chores, how to tie the curtains, and how to clean the carpet if it got dirty. The girl didn't even know what the thing was called when she started to brush it. Sarah reported to the boy when the cleaning was done, and taught the girl to bow before leaving the master. As soon as they left Riley's chambers, they were immediately met by Lloyd, who was looking for a maid. Sarah bowed to him and noticed that Nini did not, so she bowed her head herself. The maid whispered that he had a bad temper, and if she looked at him with such hatred, she would definitely get into trouble. The red-haired man asked if this was the girl who had arrived from Solia yesterday. Nini replied that she was just being explained her duties, and he asked her name and wanted to talk to her. It was the first time his younger brother had brought someone home, and he wanted to know more about this person, and maybe she knew something about receiving that medal. Nini wasn't going to answer, and this behavior angered him, but the girl just assessed his insignificant level of mana and stood silently. Sarah began to say that the girl had not yet been taught everything, but he continued to be indignant and promised that with such manners she would not last long here. Nini said that he was not her master, and that he had not brought her here either. She added a swear word to her request that made even Sarah's jaw drop. The girl crossed her arms over her chest and told him in disgust that she served Mr. Riley. The red-haired man shouted that she had no right to think such a thing and look him in the eye, and he swung his hand at her. But the next moment, Nini ordered him to sleep, and he fell to the floor, enveloped in streams of magic. Sarah could not believe it, and could hardly contain her scream of surprise. Nini said that he would sleep for half an hour, and noted that he was indeed a member of a great family, because he even tried to resist. But the girl was bragging to the maid about her 6th level of magic, and she was speechless, wondering what kind of person they had brought to this house. Sarah wondered what she should do with him, but the dark-haired woman said that when he woke up, he would think it was a strange dream, so she should just throw him on the couch. Nini said that since she was supposed to serve her masters, she did not answer him properly, just swearing. The girl realized that she would get into such trouble all the time and asked for permission to use a little magic. But the next moment, Riley came out of his room and wondered why his brother was sleeping under his door. Sarah was about to make an excuse when the boy said it didn't matter and wanted to take the girl away. The maid replied that her training was complete and she could be free, but the boy grabbed her by the shoulder and said it was time for magic. Sarah watched them go, and this time decided to forgive the girl for her behavior, because she had promised to forget the manners of Lower Salt. Riley put the master's things on the table, and the girl asked him if he would bring him tea, to which he replied that her question was strange, she was a wizard. Nini called him a fool, because she was still a maid, even if she didn't look like one, and immediately covered her mouth, realizing that she had said the wrong thing. Riley was surprised by the impudence of the Lower Salt wizards, but he didn't care if she learned her manners later. He asked to come closer and look at the master's magical appendages, which included a ring and a hoop. The boy said he had been looking at them for a while, but still didn't understand how to use them. The girl said that she didn't know either, but that these items must have either mana or a trap. She hadn't seen him put on anything other than the cloak herself, because he didn't have any other clothes when she was there. Thinking about it, the boy asked the girl to keep these things with him, and he would try to find out something from his friend. Nini was surprised and asked why he didn't learn magic from his friend and why he needed her. Because the girl had reached her level of magic with the help of pills and had only mediocre skills compared to others. Riley replied that it might not be her, but the girl wanted to find freedom. She was constantly trusting someone and being abandoned every time, either as a magical masterpiece or as garbage that could do nothing. No one thought about her feelings, and she became more and more attached to a particular person. The boyfriend said that to be close to someone, you don't need a purpose, and they don't have to be useful to everyone. The girl had to know that you can be free only when you do what your heart says. And she had just reminded the boy of himself in the past, so she shouldn't worry about it, and just get on with her life. Nini was touched by these words, because it was the first time she had heard them spoken to her. But Riley continued to talk and said that she would teach him, because he had already asked a friend of his to do so, and was refused. The latter would not help him even on pain of death, saying that his sword skills lacked magic, he would become a devil. The boy continued to talk about this injustice, because he had no intention of doing any dark deeds. Nini reflected on the moment that the boy had ruined, because she had already taken his warm words personally. They were riding in a carriage, and the girl told her that to use magic you need a circle. If a person's heart is surrounded by one ring of light, then they are a first-level magician, and so on. She had 6 of them, and said that the source of everything is light. Riley agreed that this was the case in this world, and again he had to say that he was talking to himself when the girl tried to find out about his visits to other worlds. Nini held up a hand with a glowing light, and said that its reproduction was the basis of the training of mages. Creating everything from nothing was a miracle, and at the same time a fundamental concept of magic. To use the magic of light, One needed to know some characteristic of a person, something they were good at. Riley marveled at her trick with light, and wondered what he was good at. He wanted to know what her specialty was, and she said that there was no one specific one. It seemed to her that there was nothing she was good at, but also nothing she couldn't do. She enthusiastically said that this was probably why she survived the experiment, because she could do anything. Riley was incredulous and asked if she was just bragging about it, and he was going to ask his friend about it as well. They were on their way to see him, and had almost arrived. The girl wondered how powerful his friend was, and even though she didn't have much time left, with her 6th level, she shouldn't be worse than him. When they arrived, she got ready to meet this distinguished gentleman. But Riley just started shouting Indal's name at the top of his lungs and calling for him. They heard lazy footsteps, and their owner shouted that they were closed today. He was stretching his neck and asking what kind of asshole couldn't read the signs and was shouting here. The red-browed man asked where the boys' manners were, because people come to stores when they're open. Riley said that their princess had finally woken up at sunset. He wondered if he had heard it wrong, and that the boy was now a hero, not a lazy sword. He wondered if the metal was pressing on him now. The red-browed man noticed an unfamiliar face and asked about the new maid standing next to him. But Riley said that they wanted to find out something, and that's why they came together. The girl froze at that moment and could not understand what this creature was doing here. Riley told her about his recent visit to Solia and the interesting information he had heard in the temple. The other person lazily asked what could be so interesting, and Riley said that he now had to catch it. Nini could not understand what the dragon was doing here, whose energy and form were seen in a simple red-browed boy from the store. The dragon was asking what the boy had just said, and Riley answered literally that he had been asked to catch a dragon in the Temple of Salt, and asked if there were any here. Redbrow started laughing at what he heard and pounded his fist on the table at the news. Wiping away his tears of laughter, he asked why he was asked to perform such a feat, and wondered if the boy would now become a dragon slayer. Riley was disgusted by his new nickname, and asked what he was thinking. The dragon didn't understand what they were thinking in that temple. Was he so quiet that they took him for a fool? Riley asked if there were really no more of his relatives in these parts, but he had not met them for 3,000 years, and was the only dragon here. The dragon prepared cocktails for the guests, and assured them that they would not interfere with their work. Riley sipped his drink through a straw and wondered if his friend was going to do something in the salt. The dragon assured him that something like that made no sense, and could only cause problems. The next moment, he was shouting at the maid, looking at her with the eyes of a dragon and ordering her to keep her mouth shut. Riley asked to leave the girl and offered to look at his trophies, laying out his cloak and jewelry. The red-browed man said that this was a regular tavern, and he was selling alcohol here. Riley asked what this fool was doing in his alcoholic's paradise, and said he knew. They argued for a while about who should help whom and how to ask for it. The dragon asked about the money for such services, but Riley said that it was not customary to take money from friends. The red-browed man called him a devil without a heart, and said that he was being robbed in broad daylight. Looking at the things, he assessed them in a second and asked where to start. Riley was most interested in the cloak, but there was nothing special about it. It would simply stop being affected by weather conditions. The girl noticed that it would provide magic from obstacles, and spells would always be at the maximum level. The dragon raised his hand with the bracelet and said that it was something like a storage room. You just need to let in a little mana and additional space will open up. The blue cube shone on everyone, and the boy noticed that it looked like an inventory, but now there was nothing in it. He wondered what would happen if the bracelet itself broke, and Redbrow said that all things would be lost and that it could not be repaired. The girl looked at the bracelet and asked how he could so easily recognize the equipment of a 7th-level magician, to which he replied with a smile that he was just a dragon. He threw her the ring and told her to put it on, and she was surprised by the effect. The ring attracted and absorbed all the surrounding mana from the air. Riley asked if it really worked, because when he put it on, nothing happened. The girl assured him that it did and was surprised by the boy's words, but the dragon said that he was a monster. Nini asked what that meant, and the boy asked her to keep quiet because no one would be better off with this information. He gave all the trophies to Nina, and even if she didn't want to take them, she could just keep them, because he was too lazy to carry them around. Riley asked Indol if he could measure the amount of mana. The dragon had just recently been brought one, but he didn't understand what the boy wanted to measure it for. Riley replied that it was not for him, and pointed to the girl. Indol came close to her surprised face again, and started sniffing Nini. He immediately said that she was really unusual, especially her eye on the affected part of her face, which was shimmering from mixing energies of different colors. Riley asked if that was why she had such a strange mana color, explaining that it was always dark with all types of spells. The dragon thought about it for a while, and said that he had really met an interesting person. He looked at her and wondered if his friend knew about the extremely limited time of this girl's life. But Riley now asked to measure his mana level as well, and the dragon again reminded him of his ban on practicing magic. But the boy replied that he was not going to conquer any world, he was just tired of getting apples from the tree himself, which made his interlocutor speechless. They went out into the courtyard of a low, cracked obelisk, and Riley put his hand to it. He didn't understand why the stone was reacting so slowly. The girl wanted to say something, and the dragon added that he hadn't seen anything like this for a long time. Riley had already accused his friend of having a defective or poorly maintained artifact, but he was angry at his words, because he personally takes care of it. Nini said that Riley's specialty was time. He asked what was in it for him, and if it was good, but the next moment, the artifact crumbled. The girl noticed that stones crack and crumble over time, which is what happened to the artifact now. The dragon tried to explain it briefly, and said that the boy was only able to use time magic and nothing else. He decided to show it to Riley, who was screaming in surprise. Indol activated the fireball in his palm, its tongues forming a sphere, and explained that although it was not his element, it was about the same level as an average wizard. Then he showed what the ball would look like in Riley's performance. The fire from his hand just flowed down and was no bigger than a match flame. The boy was getting frustrated with his dream of becoming a wizard. His life would have been even better than when he had the internet. Even the dragon didn't know what internet he was talking about, and the boy was already holding his head from his grief. Nini tried to defuse the situation and said that she had heard in the tower that the owners of time magic became bosses and held high positions, which the boy regarded as a mockery. He asked if there was any magic that could turn back time, which made the girl laugh. Nini said that if he applied his skills to the apple tree, the fruits would ripen and fall on their own faster, and even new ones would grow faster, so she wouldn't have to wait for next year. The boy was offended by this joke, and said that the girl would pick them herself. In the evening, they returned to the estate, and the boy complained at the table that he had no outstanding skills. He watched the flashes of light magic in his hand, and although Nini was surprised at his quick learning, he could only summon it for half a second. The girl tried to soften the situation again, saying that it didn't matter that they hadn't been able to learn her special skill. Astroya was already dead, and she would never have to use that much mana again. The next moment, footsteps sounded, and the brothers came to the table and asked where the boy had been all day. Riley said that he was passing through the village of leaves, to which Lloyd was surprised, because Sarah and Ian had been at the estate all day. His brother asked if he was traveling without a guard, and Riley pointed to the girl next to him, and said that he was not alone. Lloyd was even more surprised by this, looking at the fragile maid of small stature. Lady Iris had also arrived, and was glad that everyone was finally here. She said that while her son was traveling, they had a guest. To the boys' surprise, they were joined by Bishop Ravosa, who bowed and said he had not seen Mr. Riley and Mrs. Nini for a long time. Lloyd and Lion were surprised to see Nini so friendly. She served the bishop's cutlery and assured him that dinner would be served shortly, and he politely thanked her. Lloyd asked his guest why he was so polite to the maid, to which he said that they must not have known and their brother had not said anything. Lloyd looked surprised, and Ravosa waited for the girl's permission, which she gave. He began to tell with enthusiasm how this boy and girl had caught the Grand Master Astroi and burned him to ashes. The guest pointed to the girl and introduced her as a 6th-level magician, which made the brothers' faces freeze in surprise. They asked why she had become a maid. Riley was not happy that her identity had just been revealed in this manner, but the main thing was that this intruder was up to something. His kindly, hypocritical face seemed too suspicious, and he simply had to be the main villain of the whole story. He didn't even have any reason to come so far, and it was not a good sign. As he was leaving in the morning, Ravosa invited him to visit the temple again sometime. Riley answered lazily, and the bishop noticed his unchanging character. Lady Iris would always be glad to see a guest at their estate, and the man bowed and thanked them for their hospitality and said he would pray for their health. The carriage departed, and Riley looked at Nina and said that he could see right through the man. He was supposedly here to check on his mother's health, but he was talking to them almost constantly, which only meant he was up to something. Nini held the box from the bishop and suggested that maybe he came because of the prophecy of Frisia, and the boy agreed. Riley said that he came with a gift, not because he was concerned about his mother's health, which meant that there was some kind of bribe in the box. And since you ate the gingerbread, you'd better work for it. Nini thought the boy was about to do what Frisia had asked, but Riley shouted at the stupidity of it. He wasn't going to do it, and there was no reason to bend over backwards for anyone. He was sick and tired of it all, and so were all the saints. Although Frisia was somehow different from the saint from her previous life, Nini again didn't understand what he was babbling about. She applied the bracelet and threw the box into the magical vault. Meanwhile, Riley was lamenting the coincidence that it was during the tournament that all this had broken out. He was hoping that nothing would happen for a while, but the girl assured him that if he said so, it would be exactly the opposite. After a while, he was standing with a sour face in his father's office, next to Nini. He asked about the girl's magical abilities, but the boy said that Jan should have told him about them anyway. But the father shouted that this was the first time he had heard of her 6th level of magic. Since Astroya was of the 7th level, and the girl was of the 6th level, and seemed quite normal, he wondered what her real purpose was. The man did not understand why a mage of such a high level would take a job as a servant, as she could have found something better to do. Nini said that she liked it here, and didn't mind serving them faithfully, that she had found what she had lost in the tower cellars. Her father asked her if she had really been with Riley since Solia, and the next moment asked what she thought of his son. Both of them looked at him in surprise, and the next moment the girl said with a smile that she thought he was a good person. Riley immediately shouted out what they were talking about, and what a strange atmosphere had suddenly developed, to which the father and the girl just laughed. Nini bowed and said that this 6th level was just a result of her past, and she wanted to live in the present. The girl thought that she had only until the fall to live, and might not even survive the summer. She wanted to live the rest of her time in a normal life. Nini told her father that she was happier now than when she was a magician in her previous life. The man asked if there was anything she was not happy with, and she replied that everyone was nice to her and everything was fine. Hearing this, her father asked her to continue to help Riley, and she bowed, promising to do her best. It was strange for her father to see a 6th level mage as a servant. Riley decided to seize the moment and asked his father for permission to go to Rainfield for the summer. Meanwhile, the two older brothers discussed the impossibility of the situation. They didn't understand how Riley had managed to get a 6th level mage as a maid, and the only explanation they could think of was that medal. Lloyd could not stand it any longer and said that he and his brother also needed to do something great, because only then could they win the battle for the inheritance. Lion agreed that after the trip to Solia, their younger brother had indeed become a contender. He flipped through the papers and read about the search for a dark wizard in Rainfield. Lloyd immediately offered to go there and catch the bad guy, but his brother was not interested in him. The older man remembered that Riley had been visiting Rainfield since the first days of summer. Meanwhile, the father allowed his son to go to Rainfield, which made him jump for joy. Lion thought that it would look quite natural if their younger brother simply never returned from his vacation.